It will be the biggest misfortune in life if you suddenly meet dragons. Powerful not only physically but also magically, they are humanity's most sworn enemies. True, no one really remembers anymore why this conflict started. The war that began many centuries ago still continues. There is no end to the mutual extermination. Blood flowed like a river on both sides, and the price paid was very high. Despite rare attempts, neither side was willing to compromise. With each such attempt, the flames of war flared up more than ever. And then, there was no mercy for anyone. At some point, the sides even began to forget whether they were superior to their opponents or whether they were more powerful than them. In any case, they stopped counting the dead long ago, and the battles inexorably followed one another. Gradually, the story came to Leon, a promising commander who was destined to end the war. His first target was Losweiser, the leader of the dragons. But history played a cruel joke on Leon. He was betrayed and captured. For the first time, a human commander fell into the humiliating captivity of dragons. Silence reigned in the dungeon where Leon sat. Suddenly, footsteps began to be heard there. The guards immediately recognized their queen by her steps. The queen orders the guards to leave her alone with the prisoner. The guards dispersed, and Losweiser went to the cell. Entering Leon's cell, she began to mock him. The proud commander asked for only one thing: death. The queen smiled at this request. Suddenly she took Leon by the chin, finding him quite handsome. To enhance this effect, she began to scar his face. Her razor-sharp claws cut Leon's flesh. Leon screamed again and called for his own death. However, instead, the queen offered to join her clan. Leon laughed, calling the queen unworthy of himself. The queen's gaze flickered at these words. With her magic, she unexpectedly slammed the hero into the wall. The collision was of terrible force, and Leon coughed up blood. Soon, he was kicked in the chest. The queen found Leon's refusal a sign of weakness. Afterwards, she increased the pressure of her foot so that Leon would come to his senses faster. At some point, Leon woke up, his eyes radiating pain. Seeing this, the queen continued to belittle the commander. In response, Leon shouted out that the dragoness should not underestimate people. The next moment, her tail wrapped around Leon's neck. Having raised him above the ground, the queen found the commander to be overly stubborn. Her tail increased the pressure, gradually suffocating Leon. When he had no more strength left, Leon suddenly turned to the dragoness as if she were a monarch. She was surprised, thinking that they would now beg for mercy. However, Leon spoke about some of the queen's mistakes. After which, Leon began to list exactly where the queen had made a mistake. Losweiser loosened her grip, allowing Leon to speak without difficulty. But then the commander's eyes changed color. After all, the queen, in her stupidity, tasted his blood. The next moment, she released Leon from her grip. Then the queen herself took a few steps back. She felt a strange heat in her body. The heat was so intense that she even fell to the ground. No matter how hard she tried, Losweiser couldn't figure out what exactly had happened to her. At that moment, Leon approached her. He said that from now on, the queen's life would be filled only with pain. The brave commander had barely finished speaking when the queen jumped on him. She deliberately pushed him to the floor. Losweiser's breasts pressed against Leon's very tightly. The queen's face changed. Her lips and eyes expressed strong excitement. The next moment, she kissed the hero very hard. Leon didn't move, perhaps because he liked it. About an hour had passed since their unexpected closeness. The effect that the queen was under control was weakening. And only now did she realize what exactly had happened between her and the man. Almost screaming, she began to cover her nakedness, further demanding from Leon an explanation of what happened. Without hiding it, Leon explained that this was how the blood curse manifested itself. The queen did not understand how the curse had forced her into intimacy. Leon could not explain this because he also expected something different. His explanation only infuriated the queen. Leon made it clear that the dragon had enjoyed the hour he had spent with it. Moreover, according to tradition, the queen could no longer be with anyone else. Now, Leon was mocking the queen in every possible way. The next moment, the queen was already running towards Leon in order to kill him. However, Leon was not afraid of death because he knew that it would soon overtake him. After all, in any case, the queen's life will never be the same. Without answering this, Losweiser got dressed as quickly as possible. After thinking it over again, she decided to change her plans about Leon. Therefore, it was no longer in Losweiser's interests to kill him or let him die. And then the Queen used her magic on Leon. As for Leon, before his capture, he was the best of the best. At an early age, for his bravery, he came to the attention of a dragon hunter. That's exactly how Leon's career started under someone else's protectorate. Later, in his first military campaign, Leon distinguished himself by destroying a large number of enemies. Subsequently, Leon came to be seen as humanity's only hope for victory in the war. But it so happened that from now on, Leon is in captivity. The thought that Leon had spent 2 years in captivity awakened him from his sleep. Leon jumped up and tried to catch his breath from the terrible dream. Then I felt a strange, but quickly passing burning sensation in my chest. He looked like he was inside some luxurious apartment. Soon the door creaked. Because of her, a certain little girl was staring at Leon. She was loudly surprised that the commander had finally woken up. Len himself was speechless. The little one was so cute. Dangling his legs over the side of the bed, Leon felt like he was in heaven. Approaching the little one, he joyfully called her an angel. Then he rose to his knees, asking her to identify herself. With some delight, the little one named herself Muen. Leon smiled because he liked the name. Suddenly, Muen started talking about her mother, which confused Leon a little. Meanwhile, Muen knew a lot about Leon. After all, she knew everything about Leon from her mother. Vague doubts about Muen's mother crept into Leon's mind. He turned white when the girl said her name, which was Losweiser. Leon recoiled in horror. Nodding her head, Muen confirmed that he was her father. Leon's breath caught in shock, and his eyes rolled back in his head. Until the very end, Leon could not believe that he had a child from a dragon. Suddenly, Muen ran to the side, seeing her mother. And Losweiser was indeed there. Muen expected her parents to hug, since the Queen visited Leon every day. Losweiser nodded, confirming her daughter's words. Then, she asked her daughter to play outside, because she had a conversation with Leon. Losweiser approached and confirmed that the girl was Leon's daughter. Leon did not understand at all such an absurd situation. After all, besides his daughter, they also spared his life for some reason. The Queen made it clear that she could not simply let Leon go. Leon began to scream, accusing the Queen of outraging him. And in general, he called everything that happened torture. The Queen grinned and wrapped her tail around Leon's leg. Then she abruptly pushed him onto the bed. Gracefully, the Queen began to crawl onto him. Just one movement, and Leon lost his outerwear. Having summoned magic, she was going to leave a mark on the commander's body. It was a mark of shame that prevented Leon from escaping. Moreover, with such a mark, Leon would simply be a traitor to people. Leon didn't understand why the Queen had gone to so much trouble. Losweiser moved closer, practically caressing Leon's lips. Suddenly, she whispered about the eternal shame for the outstanding commander. Moreover, Leon attracted her attention as a partner. This is precisely how, through captivity and lust, the cunning dragon's revenge was expressed. Some time has passed since the bed scene. The courtiers constantly discussed the Queen's good mood. Many openly laughed at the Queen's choice of partner. And Leon himself wasn't thrilled, considering how insatiable Losweiser was. He was willing to put up with a lot of things, but not with something like this. Leon was constantly looking for ways to escape. But in all places suitable for such a thing, he always met guards. Leon generally found the number of guards strange. While he was thinking, he noticed something. It was a small hole in the ground. A path that could be both salvation and a trap. Despite all his fears, Leon decided to try his luck. Gathering his courage, Leon crawled into the hole. However, Leon's actions were seen by Muen. She quickly told her mother that her father had climbed into the dog hole. The Queen laughed, letting Leon have his fun. However, Muen hoped that her mother would be able to catch Leon. Coming from the little girl's lips, these words sounded unnecessarily rude. Then the Queen began to correct Muen. After all, Leon should have been brought back, not killed. Sometime later, Leon was running through the middle of forests and meadows. Just a little more, and he will be able to leave the borders of the dragon's domain. Just in case, he turned around, not seeing any pursuit. But as soon as Leon looked up, his eyes trembled. In the middle of the sky, Losweiser was diving towards him. In just a moment, she was very close to Leon. In any case, Leon no longer had a chance to escape. They landed opposite Leon, laughing at his ridiculous prank. Afterwards, Losweiser hinted that Leon had only escaped with her permission. Leon partly acknowledged this, although he could not do otherwise. Afterwards, Losweiser again started talking about the shameful mark on Leon's chest. Leon was not afraid of the consequences and was even ready to go live in the wilderness. The queen laughed and flapped her wings. Afterwards, she suddenly grabbed Leon with her paw. Having flown into the sky, she began to carry Leon somewhere. After several hours of flight, a human town began to emerge nearby. Leon was thrown straight onto him. Luckily, there was a tree in the path of the fall. Having broken a lot of branches under him, Leon managed to land in one piece. A second later, rubbing his battered body, he stood up. He barely glanced to the side and was dumbfounded. After all, the night darkness was cut by lights. Leon never expected to find himself so close to the city. Suddenly, Losweiser's breasts heaved next to him. She confirmed that Leon was back within human limits. However, she knew that Leon could not possibly return back. After this was said, the symbol on Leon's chest began to glow. But the symbol lit up for a reason, because it reflected Losweiser's thoughts about Leon. With the help of the mark, the queen could provoke Leon into intimacy. In particular, she wanted it now, in order to disgrace Leon against the backdrop of his native civilization. Leon tensed, trying to resist. Suddenly grabbing the queen's hand, he made it clear that he would find an opportunity for revenge. His rudeness and pressure briefly stunned the queen. But she came to her senses very quickly. She agreed to give Leon the opportunity to do something like this. A minute later, Losweiser did what she had planned. Afterwards, she quite enjoyed the recent moments. In the end, she even praised Leon for his efforts. Then he even suggested that Leon repeat something similar every month. Leon recoiled, calling Losweiser completely crazy. Having agreed, she was going to return home, taking Leon with her. But suddenly, Leon stopped the queen's transformation. After all, he was planning to return to captivity on his own feet. Losweiser laughed because Leon could have gone back a couple of weeks. However, she was interested in testing his endurance. Some time passed and Leon's movements became slow. He began to feel short of breath and looked quite tired. All this time, Losweiser walked behind, waiting for a request for help. She even slightly belittled Leon, because all his former bravado about endurance turned out to be a dud. Suddenly, both characters became silent and froze. After all, a squad of dragon slayers appeared right in their path. Leon was overjoyed, believing that he could finally be saved. He had barely taken a step when a roar came from the queen's direction. Leon came to his senses because Losweiser could easily kill the hunters. Moreover, the hunters themselves sensed something was wrong. Then they saw Leon and Losweiser in the forest. Hoping to save the hunters, Leon began to invent. The hunter was touched by the talk of a walk, and he was about to accompany the couple to the city. The noble hunter even introduced himself as Volker. Leon thanked him politely, but still refused help. Suddenly, Leon seemed strangely familiar to Volker. What she heard alarmed the queen. Losweiser was already preparing her magic for a sneak attack. But then Leon took her prepared hand firmly in his. He then pulled her towards him, informing her that Volker had clearly made a mistake. He called Losweiser himself his wife, just to give people the opportunity to leave alive. From the outside, to Volker, the two looked like a strange but loving couple. He laughed and waved his hand, deciding not to disturb them. A minute later, the hunters moved on along their path. When they were already far away, the queen asked if Leon liked the hugs. Coming to his senses, Leon quickly pulled away. The queen was forced to admit that Leon was far from stupid, immediately reminding that despite having a daughter, the two of them were not a family. In any case, they both had to go back. However, Leon himself suddenly became hunched over. A rather painful wound spread across his palm. At some point, it completely collapsed. Losweiser looked at him haughtily. The extremely weak bodies of people did not impress her at all. Turning into a dragon, she carefully took Leon by the hem of his clothes. Then she threw it up sharply. With a loud thud, Leon landed right on his scaly back. In this state, Losweiser took him to her domain. Sometime later, Leon woke up again in his chambers. Muen leaned over him, waiting for her father to wake up. She explained that it was Losweiser who brought Leon. Leon was saddened because once again he managed to become the dragon's prey. At some point, Leon discovered that his hand was bandaged. Muen boasted that it was she who helped her daddy. Leon was a little confused because he had heard only bad things about dragons as the most bloodthirsty race. However, Muen was an exception to these rules. Considering that the half-blood nature was to blame, he praised the little girl for her efforts. Moreover, he decided to immediately explain to Muen that she should not have followed in her mother's footsteps. Suddenly Losweiser appeared, not understanding how her example was bad. Leon looked away and decided not to answer. Muen herself hastened to report that she personally bandaged the wound. However, Losweiser did not praise her daughter, rather hinting that such were her duties. Leon never expected Losweiser to be so strict. Then, Leon even suggested that his daughter play hide-and-seek. The little dragon readily agreed to this. In this way, Leon wanted to demonstrate that he was very different from Muen's mother. Quite quickly, Leon began his countdown for the game. As quickly as possible, the little dragon ran away to hide. Suddenly, Leon demanded similar behavior from the queen herself, and in general, openly calling Losweiser's approach to raising her daughter strict. Losweiser didn't see any problems, because that was how things were done in their society. And in principle, Leon's opinion of Muen as a half-dragon was humiliating for the queen. Suddenly, Leon even called the queen his sweetheart. After hearing this, Losweiser's gaze changed. She suddenly grabbed Leon by the clothes and pulled him towards her. Hissing, she made it clear that Leon was nothing more than a slave for sexual pleasures. Because of such pressure, Leon was unable to even object. And yet, Losweiser shifted the care of her daughter onto Leon. After all, oddly enough, the little girl liked the man. After this conversation, Leon headed outside. He was still realizing that he had gone from being a great dragon hunter to being a nanny. Suddenly, Leon noticed a silhouette behind him. It was Muen, who still didn't really know how to hide. And so, Leon discovered it very quickly. For some reason, there was a pause between the characters. Leon peered into Muen's face, finding her displeased. In order to smooth things over, he decided to apologize just in case. But then, for some unknown reason, the little girl ran off somewhere. Leon rushed after her, completely not understanding his daughter's behavior. At some point, he lost sight of her. For the first time, he felt how difficult it was to manage a child. He had no idea that Muen was already behind him. The next moment, she joyfully jumped on him. Leon himself didn't understand anything, because a minute ago, the little girl had run away from him. However, Muen completely rejected this. It was hard for himself, but Leon accepted that he had simply made a mistake. He had no idea that a dragon similar to Muen was watching him go. Silently, perhaps partly with envy, she watched him go. Soon, the action moved to the area with the fountains. Muen was actively drawing, humming something under her breath. Watching her, Leon felt the joy of fatherhood for the first time. He swore to himself that sooner or later he would help his daughter escape from her mother. A couple of minutes later, Muen presented her drawing to her father. Leon looked at him and froze. As it turned out, she also depicted her sister in the drawing. Leon was taken aback when he realized that he had another daughter. He could only guess when he and Losweiser managed to make another half-dragon. Gradually, everything that happened in the garden became clear. As for her sister, Muen called her overly shy. Leon agreed, as the reaction was normal, since the father and second daughter had never seen each other before. In any case, Leon had a very serious conversation with Losweiser. Deciding to find out why she was hiding her second daughter, Leon came to the queen's office. Even as Leon approached, the queen felt a strange aura. A second later, Leon burst into the office. Losweiser did not expect his visit at all, and even more so since we'll be talking about another daughter. The queen laughed in response. Leon, however, was not happy, believing that he had been completely fooled. He began to play on Losweiser's feelings, threatening to include the second daughter in the family tree. Chuckling, the queen asked Leon's opinion about his second daughter. Leon believed that she hid her daughter because she considered her father's influence on Muen to be wrong. Losweiser couldn't believe that such trifles bothered Leon. Leon made it clear that he wanted to build relationships with both daughters. The queen didn't mind, but asked Leon not to complain afterwards. After their conversation ended, the action moved to the kitchen. Leon kept mentioning Losweiser while picking up the knife. Through food, he intended to completely win his daughter's favor. Leon hoped that his special dish would please his daughter. After all, in life before his capture, everyone treated Leon's culinary delights with respect. He could even imagine how happy Muen would be with such a dish. Secretly, the maids watched him work in the kitchen. One of them even admired Leon's hard work. At some point, they were distracted by the sight of the queen with her children. Unexpectedly, Losweiser sent the maids on vacation. A minute later, she entered the dining room. Leon boasted that he had tried his best for his family. At the same time, he hoped that his second daughter would also appreciate his efforts. However, for some reason, Neue looked away. Seeing this, Leon sighed in disappointment. He once again blamed Losweiser for his daughter's similar behavior. However, she suddenly asked Noah to greet her father. Stepping forward, she formally introduced herself to Leon. Leon did the same, sitting down more modestly and softly. However, Neue only stared at him mysteriously. Leon felt that this look was filled with coldness and alienation. Suddenly, Muen approached Neue and began to beg her to be more respectful. Neue openly did not want to behave like this because Leon was a weakling, and in general, she wasn't sure that Leon was her father. Her attitude cut Leon straight to the heart. A little later, the whole family sat down at the table. Leon glanced at his daughters, seeing that their characters were very different. He still tried to win his daughter's favor. Leon felt another moral blow when Neue said that she didn't like the food at all. Seeing this, Losweiser tried to hold back her laughter. She explained her behavior by her joy for Leon, thus through moral pain, forcing Leon to laugh. In turn, Moen hoped that Leon would now cook every day. But Neue spoke out sharply against this idea. It was all because Neue was already planning to build a life on her own. Losweiser herself did not understand her daughter's haste. Then Noah said that she dreamed of defeating all people. Leon choked on his food because Neue was essentially threatening her father, and therefore he tried to dissuade Noah from such an undertaking. But Neue didn't want to hear anything like that, much less be considered a child. Losweiser fully supported her daughter's idea. Nevertheless, she wanted to hear Leon's opinion on this matter. Leon frowned because no matter how much he didn't want to, he had to act carefully. And so, he did not object. Only now did it begin to dawn on Leon that Losweiser had used her daughter to put pressure on him, thus, once again, humiliating him. Leon swore to himself that he would still be able to win back. Since there were no objections, the queen allowed her daughter to enter a special university. Subsequently, the family dinner came to an end. Suddenly, Leon called Losweiser. For some reason, Leon pointed out the dirty plates. The queen left such things to the care of her servants. But Leon had a different opinion because it was the couple who had to clean up. He tried to explain to the queen that the girls needed an atmosphere of family idyll. Losweiser looked at her girls, truly finding them happy. To maintain this mood, she agreed. Suddenly, Muen also volunteered to help wash the dishes, but her sister quickly stopped her. Neue stubbornly pulled Muen aside. A little later, most of the dishes were washed. The queen waited for Leon to finally join the process. But then, Leon suddenly began to remind the dragon of a certain old conversation. And that conversation concerned the mistake of being alone with a dragon hunter. Losweiser looked at him suspiciously. Leon explained that he had learned a lot during his imprisonment. The queen interpreted his words as an attempt to escape. As quickly as possible, Losweiser tried to calm him down with a swat of her tail. But Leon resisted this with extreme ease. Following this, the magical mark on the queen's chest flared up, and she herself felt a familiar heat in her body. Using the knowledge from books, Leon knew that the special erogenous zone of dragons is their tails, and therefore now he himself could manipulate. And right now, he was going to take it out on Losweiser. Gradually, the stroking and pressing on the queen's tail increased. Barely able to speak, she demanded that her tail be released. That evening, Leon was going to switch roles with Losweiser. But the future joys did not take place, because the characters heard laughter behind the door. These were the servants who rejoiced for the queen's personal life. Thinking that there was no one inside, they entered the kitchen. There, surprised to discover how clean everything was, Leon secretly watched the servants from the closet. In this same closet, he held Losweiser close to him. A couple of minutes later, the servants finally left the kitchen. And now, Leon was ready to enjoy the queen to his heart's content. Holding her tightly, he began to bring her face to his lips. Later, noting that, overall, Losweiser didn't even resist. About 3 days have passed since that fun in the closet. Leon had been sleeping soundly for several days in a row. Suddenly, Neue decided to show how to wake him up. Roughly, she kicked Leon in the cheek. After this, Leon immediately opened his eyes. He couldn't understand anything, especially how he ended up in bed again. Losvizer, who was nearby, was ready to help him remember everything. Leon was suddenly overwhelmed by memories of that night when the mark on his chest disappeared. In the end, Leon was beaten, but only by a miracle did he not die. However, finding the queen attractive in her own way, the girls were actively discussing their father's strange behavior when he looked at Losvizer. At that very moment, the queen accidentally knocked the decoration off the chest of drawers. It rang and fell to the floor. The next moment, the decoration was picked up by Leon, after which he applied it to Losvizer's hair. The queen did not expect Leon to be so polite. Leon boasted that as a child he often looked after animals. He mentioned the neighbor's donkey in particular. In part, he compared donkeys to dragons, in particular noting the similarities with Losvizer herself, for which he immediately received a punch in the gut. Leon panted and doubled over in pain. Subsequently, the queen gave her daughters a task for this day. To help them, she singled out Leon. The girls themselves ran to the office as quickly as possible in order to get ready. Left alone with Losvizer, the queen informed Leon of her sister's visit. She didn't want Leon to catch her eye. Leon tried to joke about it, but then Losvizer suddenly moved closer to his ear. She made it clear to Leon that he had no right to show his true identity. Leon agreed, since it was primarily a matter of personal safety. Although, in fact, he had no intention of listening to some woman, already thinking about a plan to disgrace Losvizer. Later, the action moved to the classroom. Taking on the role of teacher, Leon showed his daughters how to write. Now he demanded that the girls repeat what they had demonstrated. Noya began to criticize her father because his handwriting was not as beautiful as the queen's. Leon sighed and stood up from the table. He went out into the corridor, promising to return soon. Left alone, the girls began to chat about their own things. After sending her sister off to practice writing, Noya looked strangely at her written name. Subsequently, the action moved to the castle gates. Accompanied by guards, Isha from the Red Dragon clan walked across the bridge. Suddenly, Losvizer pounced on her. Isha was also happy to see her sister, finding her appearance excellent. And yet, she expected to meet Losvizer's husband. Losvizer lied that her husband was unwell. Meanwhile, Aisha believed that the couple was in love because dragons usually did not produce children so quickly. Losvizer shook her head, brushing aside any higher feelings. Isha smirked because she knew her sister was lying. Be that as it may, Losvizer wanted to have a heart-to-heart talk with her sister. Someone was actively following those two. Having found a convenient balcony, Leon spied on the two dragons. He grinned, ready to impress everyone. Meanwhile, while walking, the sisters discussed politics. In particular, this concerned the activities of one dragon ruler named Constantine. Isha was afraid of this, believing that Constantine might go for the expansion of his state. As they talked, the mark on Losvizer's chest flared up. With horror, she realized what it all meant. Her sister noticed her strange behavior. Losvizer remained silent, although she understood that Leon was to blame for everything. Because of the heat in her body, Losvizer could hardly listen to her sister properly. Her thighs trembled and her cheeks turned pink. Once again, Isha saw her sister's strange behavior. Unable to contain herself any longer, Losvizer announced that she would be leaving for half an hour. Afterwards, she quickly walked in the other direction. However, Isha understood that Losvizer was influenced by the pattern of lust. At the same time, Leon imagined how much the queen had disgraced herself. Not a minute had passed before Losvizer burst into his room. She immediately rushed to Leon because she had already understood his insidious plan. Leon decided to pretend that he hadn't planned anything bad. Suddenly, Losvizer's grip weakened. She blushed, realizing that they wanted her for no reason. Leon chuckled to himself, thinking that he had managed to fool the queen. After all, Losvizer really believed Leon's words. And yet, strange feelings were building up inside her. And so, this time, for such a provocative behavior, she forgave Leon. Leon himself finally understood how exactly he could influence the dragon. And yet, he also felt something towards Losvizer. A second later, in order to drive away such thoughts, Leon began to slap himself on the cheeks. Moreover, his children were awaiting his return. Hours have passed since then, and evening has come. Isha said goodbye to Losvizer. Losvizer saw her off, wishing her a good journey. Having already turned into a dragon, Aisha hoped to meet her sister's husband next time. Then, flapping her wings, she soared into the clouds. Losvizer frowned as she watched her sister leave. She was already imagining how exquisitely she would make Leon pay for the inconvenience. At that very moment, Leon began to sneeze vigorously. It was clear that someone was actively remembering him. He himself was in the children's bedroom, where he had just put his daughters to bed. Carefully, so as not to wake them, he covered the girls with a blanket. Afterwards, as quietly as possible, I went out into the corridor. And then, next to him, a strange hand struck with a loud thud. It was Losvisa, who was just about to take care of Leon. She made it clear that Leon had to work off his offense all night. Then, without any consent, she dragged him along with her. The action moved to the Queen's bedroom. At Losvisa's behest, Leon brought hot water. And yet, he wanted to know why the Queen needed her. Raising her leg, Losvisa asked to wash those. Leon was perplexed by such a request. Leon stalled for time, and Losvisa raised her voice, explaining that this was the punishment. Indignantly, Leon slowly began to remove the Queen's shoes. He was quite unhappy that he had to serve such a powerful woman. And yet, Leon's gaze froze on Losvisa's legs. At some point, she even thought that he had some kind of fetish about it. Suddenly, Leon abruptly lowered the Queen's feet into the tub. She didn't last long. After all, the water in the tub turned out to be unbearably hot. And so, more by accident, she hit Leon in the face. Then he stepped on him, deciding to find out whether Leon was trying to take revenge again. Leon just laughed, voicing the Queen's request to wash his feet. In response to this, Losvisa chuckled unequivocally. Slowly, she began to lower her leg down Leon's body. Gradually, she reached his pants legs, and only there did the Queen increase her pressure. Leon tensed up because of the special feeling he was experiencing right now. With great effort, he tried to call on the Queen to stop. But Losvisa didn't want to listen to him, testing Leon's endurance. Mumming and frowning, Leon tried to resist the woman's tyranny. Gathering all his will, he suddenly grabbed her by the leg. Licking his lips, Leon said that he wanted to taste the dragon legs. After which, he bit Losvisa's leg with all his strength. The force of the bite was so great that the Queen's scream could be heard throughout the palace. So the night passed, and a new day began. In the morning, the daughters discovered that their mother was limping strangely. And Leon, in general, didn't look any better. None of the parents, however, were able to explain their appearance to their daughters. In the end, Muen thought that her parents were playing something without her. About an hour passed, and the action moved to the castle gardens. There, past lush vegetation and fountains, Leon strolled with Losvisa. The servants who observed this believed that the royal couple had finally decided to go on a date. But some thought that there were no feelings between the Queen and the prince. And indeed, their gazes were directed past each other. Walking a little behind, Leon recalled how this had happened. After all, not long ago, Losvisa told Leon that he was supposed to go out for a walk together. She attributed this responsibility to Leon's work. Yet Leon felt that something was wrong with Losvisa. The children secretly watched the parents walk. Suddenly, Muen decided to help her parents improve their relationship. She quickly jumped up from her place. Pretty soon, she was running up to her mom and dad. First, taking Leon by the hand. Then, firmly grasping Losvisa's palm. The next moment, she joined her parents' palms. Having shown how to walk, Muen ran back. Already there, for her interference, she received a thrashing from her sister. It was understandable that Leon and Losvisa felt uncomfortable walking around like that. And in principle, the Queen believed that Leon had begun to behave too confidentially. Leon sometimes glanced sideways at her, trying to drive away from his mind the image of the Queen, which was very different from public opinion. He suddenly decided to point out that the girls called Losvisa mother. Leon elaborated that the daughters approached Losvisa not with love, but with a certain alienation. But the Queen saw no difference in such addresses. In any case, Leon recommended that she get closer to her daughters. Words about parental love made the Queen shudder. For this reason, she suddenly ran away. Suddenly, Losvisa began to talk about the homesickness that Leon was clearly experiencing. Promising to help with this, she led Leon to a certain gate. Losvisa didn't yet know how to explain to Leon what he was about to see. And there was no single name for this place either. Using the private key, Losvisa led Leon inside. Looking around, Leon decided to call this place the Dragon's Treasury. After all, various artifacts were installed around here and there. Losvisa, in turn, spoke about things that were very important for that. Gradually, the conversation turned to the Queen's parents, although she did not know them. Leon found this familiar, as he himself was an orphan. In any case, Leon wanted to know why he was in this place. Losweiser chuckled and walked over to the huge chest. Opening it, she promised Leon to help him forget. Inside the chest, armor was shining. Moreover, Losweiser was ready to give the armor to Leon. A sly smirk appeared on her face as Leon reached for the armor. As soon as Leon touched the armor, some kind of magic was activated. The armor reacted strangely to Leon's touch. Losweiser's laughter was heard, delighted that the trap had been triggered. The next moment, magical symbols are drawn around Leon. It turned out that the Queen had performed certain manipulations with the armor. The strange magic continued to work, causing Leon to fall to his knees. The mark on his chest was also seething strangely. Losweiser explained that with the help of the trap, she increased her influence over Leon. She was interested to see how Leon would handle something like this. Leon himself, through force, angrily uttered the Queen's name. After which, under the influence of magic, he fell completely. Leon couldn't really move, but his reproductive system was beginning to take on a life of its own. The next moment, Losweiser fell on top of him. Everything that is happening now was a cunning plan of the Queen, which she had been hatching for a long time. Losweiser laughed as she asked Leon to point out his acting skills. Only now did it dawn on Leon that everything Losweiser had said earlier in the treasury was an empty lie. Oddly enough, Losweiser asked not to accuse herself of lying. After which, very slowly, she began to undress. Letting her hair down, the Queen admitted that she loved to dominate. She hoped that Leon himself would be ready for a similar experiment. Slowly, she began to lean over it. For the next couple of hours, a humming sound, accompanied by groans, could be heard from the treasury. Just like the first times, Leon was literally raped. Pleased with herself, Losweiser glanced at him. At some point, she began to peer into Leon's face. Now, she found him much more mature and attractive. Leon recoiled, thinking that they were pulling his leg again. The Queen smiled, because Leon had not only changed in appearance, but had also become a little smarter. And yet, she had complaints. With a wink, she hinted at Leon's male health. Hearing this, Leon froze thoughtfully. The Queen specified that she meant the dragon hunter's physical form. Time has passed since the moment in the treasury, and a new day has arrived. Completely depressed, Leon left his bedroom. Losweiser, who was in the corridor, noted that he apparently had not slept well. In this case, Leon blamed only herself. In front of their daughter's eyes, the parents began to quarrel again. When the disagreements died down, Losweiser asked Leon to take on Noah's urgent training. After all, at this moment, Leon was only useful for sexual pleasures. Leon became indignant and began to justify himself by saying that sometimes he felt unwell. He agreed to help his daughter, but in return, he demanded concessions from the Queen. Losweiser was willing to make a deal, but only if it wasn't too much. Leon nodded, thus making it clear that he would voice the demand later. In that case, Losweiser left Noah in the care of his father. When she left, Noah noted that her parents often quarreled. Suddenly, Leon heard Noah speak affectionately of Losweiser. Just in case, he asked her to repeat it. Thus, he learned that Noah's attitude towards Losweiser had changed for the better. Hearing the confirmation, Leon laughed heartily. The truth is, Noah didn't understand at all why her father was so cheerful. After a short pause, Noah wanted to get back to her studies as soon as possible. Subsequently, the events moved to the children's room. For a very long time, Leon sat there over his textbooks. Eventually, Losweiser found him there. Seeing her, Leon said that he had found the best way to teach his daughter. He believed in Noah's abilities and that his daughter would be able to pass the exam easily. Losweiser was not surprised to see herself personified in her daughter. But Leon had a different opinion on this matter. Suddenly, he began to boast that he was the best student of all the candidates for the role of Dragon Slayer. Afterwards, wanting to hear among whom Losweiser was the best. The question caught Losweiser off guard. So, the Queen decided to express her superiority by capturing Leon. Leon almost burst into tears when he remembered something like this. At the same time, the Queen saw Pepper on the table. She was extremely interested in the fate of the fruit. Leon explained that he took Pepper from the kitchen to freshen up. To her horror, Leon bit off a particularly hot pepper with ease. A second later, his face turned red and his cheeks puffed out. Another moment, and Leon was almost spewing fire from himself. Then he began to rush around the kitchen, desperately looking for water. While he was throwing himself around, Losweiser caught him. She pressed her palms firmly to his heated face. The queen hoped that the cold from them would be able to calm the heat. Leon practically melted in pleasure, so much did he enjoy the queen's touch. This was especially true of the fingertips that literally caressed Leon. A minute later, he removed her hands, thanking her for saving him. Then they both looked away in shame. Afterwards, she sent Leon to bed and asked him not to experiment with Pepper anymore. As he watched her go, Leon only thought about how he could feel the queen's touch again. However, Leon pushed these thoughts away as quickly as possible because Losvisor was an enemy. And so, he decided to look for a way to restore his body. Having found a textbook on alchemy, he began to read it actively. At some point, finding one tempting recipe. This was exactly what Leon needed so badly. Another night has passed, and another new day has begun. Leon continued to work with Noah. His lessons bore fruit, and Noah learned very quickly. However, the girl's face still did not radiate happiness. Leon guessed that his daughter was not very happy with her results. However, she herself decided to start her adult life as soon as possible. So, he hastened to praise his daughter for her success. For the first time, Noah thanked her father. Leon was about to continue the lesson when he suddenly started coughing. It was all about the pepper that Leon continued to use. Noah herself remembered her mother's instructions that she did not have a great opinion of Leon, but still noted his education. And Noah's pepper was also known. In connection with this, she passed on something to Leon. The daughter reported that it was a transmission from Losvisor herself. Taking the pill, Leon thanked his daughter for her care, and the queen to boot. After which, the training continued. Gradually, events moved to the palace kitchen. At Leon's command, the servants brought him the ingredients. Leon acted cunningly, hoping that no one would be able to guess his plan. In fact, Leon was going to make one medicine for himself. With a sigh, he got down to business. Leon vigorously mixed the ingredients and poured the resulting mixture into a saucepan. He spent several hours on this activity, but did not achieve any results. No matter how hard he tried, Leon couldn't figure out at what specific stage he was failing. And the preparation of the medicine itself was quite a challenge. In addition to balancing the temperature, Dayon also had to actively dissolve the components. Things came to a standstill when suddenly thunder roared outside the window. Leon noticed this, thinking that there would be a thunderstorm. Intrigued, he looked out the window, and only then did Leon remember the power of lightning. After all, lightning was the best means for dissolving the components. With certain skills, Leon recreated a small spark. A few hours later, he held a pill in his hands. Finally, he could rejoice at his success. Suddenly, Muen appeared, interested in her father's occupation. Leon didn't immediately realize that his daughter was very close. In order to hide his plan, he instantly threw his entire laboratory off the table. But Muen had managed to see a lot and was now interested in it. In a hurry, Leon lied that he made pills for Losvisor, although those, of course, were intended for him. Muen was glad that Daddy took care of Mommy. Leon smiled and nodded in agreement. A little more time passed and a downpour hit the area. Lying on the bed, Leon thought about the medicine he had received. Even though it was made according to the dragon's recipe, he decided to try it. But before that could happen, there was a knock at the door. Losvisor entered the room. She immediately stated that she already knew about a certain gift for herself from her daughter. Leon sighed, not expecting the news to spread so quickly. However, Losvisor did not come to make a scene, but only expressed her curiosity about Leon's hobbies. And yet, asking to show what was done by that one. Leon had no choice, because the dragon could have taken her own by force. When Losvisor opened the box, she was pleasantly surprised. Leon fell silent, waiting to see what would happen next. But then Losvisor declared that people should not accept such things. After which, she threw the box back into Leon's hands. Losvisor explained that such a medicine could only help a dragon, but not a human. After all, the human body simply would not be able to cope with such power. Leon doubted it because in his life he had defeated a huge number of dragons, including entire kings. After which, he boldly threw the pill into his mouth. In this way, Leon demonstrated his courage to the queen. Not even a second passed before Leon was overcome by a strange sensation. He doubled over, and then a worried Losvisor ran after him. Using magic, she tried to reduce the effect of the pill. But the process was not easy, so she needed Leon to not move. However, Leon rejected her help, in response demonstrating his strength. A blue glow engulfed Leon and illuminated the entire room. Streaming and twisting, magical discharges shot out in all directions. Losweiser was shocked by what Leon was doing to himself. In fact, he mastered lightning magic by using his body as a conductor. When the magic wore off, Leon fell down tiredly. Losweiser caught it just in time. Things were bad, and the queen hurried to call a doctor. But before she could leave the room, Leon raised his hand. Losweiser didn't so much see it as feel it. Looking in love, Leon stroked her tail. Losweiser froze, completely not understanding his intentions. Meanwhile, Leon not only began to stroke her tail, but also hug her, every now and then affectionately calling Losweiser wifey. Losweiser, embarrassed, tried to push Leon away. No matter how hard she tried, Leon wouldn't let go. In any case, Leon's current behavior meant that his life was not in danger. Sighing tiredly, she decided to play along. Leon then announced that he would like to have more children. Such a frank request left the queen dumbfounded. Losweiser didn't want to hear anything about such a thing, because Leon couldn't handle even the current two. Leon didn't seem to be lagging behind, so Losweiser decided to play along again, ultimately agreeing to have more children. Delighted by this, Leon went to kiss her, although the queen was in no way prepared for such a development, ultimately knocking Leon out completely. The blow was so strong that the poor fellow immediately bent over. Losweiser leaned over, apologizing for her strength. However, the pain Leon was now experiencing was coming from his chest. The next moment, the mark on Losweiser's chest activated. Exactly the same thing happened to Leon now. Unexpectedly, Leon grabbed Losweiser by the shoulder, and then he knocked her down completely, pressing down on top of her. Leon admitted that he was losing control of his body. Losweiser was silent, but she knew that the magic and the medicine had had this effect on her captive. Suddenly, Leon leaned against the queen's tail, finding it appetizing. She screamed and tried to push Leon off of her. Losweiser paused as Leon's finger gently touched her lips. For the first time, he called her seductively beautiful. The queen was at a loss, as this was the first time she had heard such words addressed to her. Uncomfortably for myself, secretly admitting that I even wanted all this, Leon breathed heavily, hoping that his wife would be able to help him. Losweiser agreed, but only this time, after which she stopped restraining herself in any way. Thus the whole night passed, and finally a new day arrived. Leon slowly woke up. He barely opened his eyes to see Losweiser in bed in front of him. She greeted her husband affectionately, to which Leon recoiled and screamed. The next second, he felt his whole body hurt violently. And in principle, Leon did not remember anything about the last few hours of his life. Losweiser left the bed, laughing at Leon's short memory. Leon froze, because upon closer inspection, he noticed numerous marks from kisses on the queen's body. The next moment, Leon was flooded with memories of the previous night. He let out a cry, disgusted by his own weakness. Losweiser looked at him with satisfaction, her comments only worsening Leon's condition. In detail, she began to describe how exactly Leon begged to have sex. At some point, Leon asked her to stop. Afterwards, as quickly as possible, Leon began to throw his clothes on. Despite the fact that Leon was completely out of control at night, the queen was not at all angry with him. Leon laughed, hoping that Losweiser would no longer reproach him for his lack of stamina. Hearing this, the queen glared at Leon. Then she moved sharply towards him. Suddenly, she announced that she was pleased with Leon and wanted the same in the future. Leon froze, feeling like a slave for the first time. Afterwards, Losweiser started talking about the bet that Leon won. From now on, she was ready to listen to what the dragon hunter wanted to receive. Leon began to scratch the back of his head because, in fact, he hadn't even really thought about it. At some point, Losweiser asked to send someone to check on the teacher. Losweiser did not object, thinking out loud about the success of such an operation. In any case, Leon hastened to thank the queen. After the morning conversation ended, the action moved to the garden. Enjoying the warm rays of the sun and the tranquility, Leon dozed off. Muen appeared, waking up her father. Looking cheerful, Muen said that she had learned a lot about her father from Losweiser over the past night. Leon got angry because children shouldn't know such sensitive things. So, he kindly asked Muen not to interfere in the affairs of adults anymore. Seeing the blood appearing on Leon's face, the daughter rushed to her father, asking him not to die. After wiping away the blood, Leon asked Muen not to worry and promised not to abandon her. then offering to make a toy for his daughter. Having received consent, Leon began to tinker with it willingly. Having finished, he presented the resulting Muen. Leon was pleased with himself, admitting that the lessons he had taken in his youth had done him good. These thoughts quickly left Leon. For some reason, he turned around unexpectedly, however, being unable to explain his behavior. After thinking about it, Leon came to the conclusion that he felt a dragon's gaze on himself. Besides, Noya was training in roughly the same direction. A considerable amount of time passed, and evening came. Noya returned to her room where she found the toy. Even though it was given to Noah, the young dragon herself was not impressed. However, out of curiosity, she began to twist the edges of the cube. At some point, having collected the cube, Noya still mentally thanked her father for the gift. A new day dawned, and Muen began to frequently notice how Noya was hiding something. Curiosity was aroused, and she decided to find out everything. In the hiding place, there were various trinkets that, for some unknown reason, were dear to Noah. Thus, Muen was able to find out that Noya was not as callous as she wanted to appear. A moment later, Noya took her box back, and Muen got what she deserved. Later, the events moved to the Dragon Academy. It was an elite place of learning, where every dragon family wanted to send their child. It was here that Lostvisor, with her entire family, was heading. Her plans for today were truly grandiose. Leon helped his daughters carefully climb down from their mother's back. Muen was pleased with the care, but nevertheless hoped that Leon would soon reveal his dragon form. Leon laughed awkwardly, but couldn't really answer. Suddenly Noya spoke up, believing that Leon simply couldn't transform. Leon stumbled once again, because he didn't have a prepared answer. Lostvisor spoke up, explaining that her father's body was still damaged. Muen sympathized with Leon, hoping that he would recover soon. In any case, the whole family moved on. Muen ran ahead of everyone, seeing so many dragons in one place for the first time. Leon trailed behind, looking dejected. Lostvisor felt like Leon was scared to be in the midst of such a large gathering of dragons. Grinning maliciously, she decided to find out about it out loud. But Leon was not afraid. On the contrary, he was delighted. After all, every dragon we met cost a fortune. Leon was almost out loud happy about how much money he would be able to get. Later, the action moved to a small shop. The staff welcomed Lostvisor and his family. The daughters ran ahead of their parents, looking at the photographs on the walls in amazement. Lostvisor later explained that she wanted to take family photos without attracting unnecessary attention. Leon had the courage to laugh at the queen's status, which was not all-powerful. In response, Leon was deliberately stepped on. Leaving Leon behind, Lostvisor began to talk to the photographer. Their conversation gradually turned to Leon's appearance, and the queen explained that he was simply embarrassed by his tail. Although earlier, using persuasion and even threats, Lostvisor tried to force Leon to put on a fake. Be that as it may, the photographer asked the whole family to go into the next room. Half an hour later, the outfits for the photographs were chosen. There was even a specific outfit for Leon. Everyone came to the conclusion that the suit suited Leon very well. Just in case, he asked Noah's opinion on the matter. Looking away, she recognized her father as handsome. Leon, in turn, was happy about his daughter's brilliant appearance. The screen rustled, and soon Lostvisor appeared in her dress. Leon showed with his whole appearance that he was impressed by her beauty. The queen, of course, caught his gaze. Still, she regretted that Leon refused to wear a tail. Be that as it may, their family had a photo shoot ahead of them. The photographer asked everyone to take the necessary poses. Still embarrassed, both the queen and the dragon hunter looked away. And so, their joint photo took place without sincere smiles. Individual photographs followed. Leon and Lostvisor had already had to pose in them. Due to their mutual passionate glances, the photographer considered this couple to be sincere in their feelings. During the photo shoot, Leon even remembered his graduation. But then, he refused to take photos with anyone because he was in a hurry to get to work. His mentor at that time did not at all understand the young man's behavior. After a short flashback, events returned to the present. At the end of the photo session, the photographer asked the family to wait for a while. There was time for a walk, and the daughters quickly ran off somewhere. Behind them, Leon and Lostvisor discussed the situation among themselves. The queen found this act of family life necessary for the sake of her daughters. At some point, the daughters ran up to the toy counter. The owner of the stall was giving out prizes for hitting targets. In this regard, Muen quickly called Leon. After all, no matter how hard he tried, Noah couldn't hit the targets. Lostweiser acknowledged that these kinds of games have so far been difficult for her daughters. Seeing the whole family gathered, the shop owner offered to play a game. Leon decided to make sure, just in case, whether his daughters wanted toys. The girls became embarrassed and said that they did not want gifts. Realizing that everything was quite the opposite, Leon agreed to play. Leon took aim at the pistol with magic bullets. Remembering how he had handled a similar weapon before, Leon fired several shots. The targets were not hit, and Leon himself had no idea that the pistol was faulty. But in the next moment, Leon hit most of the targets at once. Leon laughed, saying that the first shots were practice shots. The whole family was delighted with Leon's capabilities. The merchant had no choice but to hand over the prize. As quickly as possible, Leon distributed the toys to his daughters. Lostweiser herself was impressed by Leon's determination. At some point, he felt the queen's gaze on him. A little later, people began to pay attention to their family. Leon tried so hard that he even managed to get a gift from Lostweiser herself. Leon himself was amused that he had managed to outplay the charlatan. Lostweiser in some ways condemned Leon, who wasted his time on all sorts of nonsense. But Leon did not agree with this. However, while hiding his true emotions, Lostweiser enjoyed this kind of attention. So, practically ordering, she asked Leon to come over that evening. Oddly enough, Leon didn't get the hint. Later, evening came and the action moved to Lostweiser Castle. Walking through the dark corridors of the castle, Leon headed to the queen's chambers. Whatever Leon did that evening, he felt a certain awkwardness. At some point, Leon overcame himself and walked forward more confidently than before. Already being near Lostweiser's chambers, he discovered that the doors were ajar. He walked inside cautiously, not seeing the queen anywhere. So he thought she was taking a bath. Looking into the bathroom, he saw Lostweiser washing herself there. Suddenly, the thought of another intimacy frightened him. Taking a deep breath, Leon began to push his fears away. A minute later, Lostweiser's voice was heard. She called Leon because she herself was ready for something. Leon already had a premonition of how exhausted he would be again. But before that, family photographs arrived at the castle. Leon even found a note on one of them. Afterwards, Lostweiser and Leon read the message there together. There, in beautiful verse, was a wish for a happy family life. Confused by such lines, the queen and the hunter thought that the note had clearly been mixed up. Meanwhile, in the present, Lostweiser was letting Leon choose the location. Looking at the balcony, Leon thought that extra eyes might see them there. Lostweiser chuckled and entrusted this choice to Leon. Leon sighed and spoke about the benefits of the hotel. Following this, Leon called on the queen to begin. With all his strength, he collapsed onto the sofa. However, Lostweiser didn't understand why Leon fell apart. Then, she even said that she had not planned any intimacy. Clearing his throat due to the awkward situation, Leon stood up. Suddenly, the queen placed a sheet of paper with a survey next to Leon. These were important questions about the family, which Leon should have answered in advance. Looking closely at the text, Leon quickly realized that the questions there were more likely intended for couples. In any case, both began to study these issues. At some point, their color types intersected in an interesting way. For now, both have decided to dismiss this fact as a coincidence. Lostweiser sighed and admitted that they both needed to get to know each other better. After which, both took up the questionnaire in earnest. As a result, it turned out that Leon knew Lostweiser better than she knew him. The queen was a little uncomfortable with how much Leon had managed to notice about her. And only in a small part, in small details, did Leon make mistakes. But even this, Lostweiser considered quite commendable. Because of this, strange thoughts about Leon appeared in her head. Leon knew nothing about the queen's thoughts and believed that she was angry with him. So Leon decided to calm Lostweiser down. For the sake of his daughters, he asked the queen to try harder. His rhetoric once again managed to confuse Lostweiser. The effect was so strong that Lostweiser literally covered Leon's face. But a week passed, and it seemed like both parents were prepared. The process was so tiring that Lostweiser often fell asleep towards the end. When the preparations came to an end and Leon was about to leave, the queen suddenly stopped him. Lostweiser demanded that Leon take a shower and return to her. Leon held his breath because no one had ever offered him anything like this before. Tom was not given time to think, and Lostweiser began to drive Leon into the bathroom. While undressing, Leon looked around, hoping that washing was not another dragon trap. Sighing, he decided to explain the queen's behavior by her nerves due to her daughter's admission. Then, feeling pleasure, Leon plunged into the warm bath. An emotion of pleasure spread across his face. The next moment, the door to the room opened. Losweiser entered there, covering herself with a thin towel. Giggling, she admitted that she had been feeling very thirsty lately. Leon's face froze when he heard what the queen could no longer bear. Having barely recovered from this state, he shouted out that he no longer wanted to be under someone else's pressure. The queen admitted that she could only truly relax with Leon, after which she opened the towel wide. Looking at her, Leon couldn't find anything to say in response. The next moment, the queen jumped into Leon's bathroom. A couple of days passed from the bathroom scene, and now the action moves to the Dragon Academy. Leon looked at Losweiser, who looked as alienated as possible. He secretly hinted that the effect of the night meetings quickly wore off for her. Embarrassed, she just angrily pushed Leon. Later, the family arrived at the reception desk. The secretary there studied the documents of those who had arrived. She was especially interested in Noah, which is why she entered the academy. Strangely enough, the document verification process dragged on. There was a slight hitch, as Noah was too young to be admitted. Losweiser stood up to defend her daughter and her right to educate her. The secretary did not dare to object and indicated where the family should go next. Ahead lay a long staircase and the fourth-floor conference hall. There, a special commission was already waiting for Leon's family. Pressing herself against Leon, Losweiser reminded him to behave accordingly. Leon considered the commission an easy target, because previously he would have easily defeated any of the dragons there. Moreover, he promised to deal with everyone if they did not accept Noah. Finally, one of the committee members, calling himself Walter, identified himself as Noah's appraiser. In response, the parents nodded approvingly. Later, Walter began asking the couple questions. Leon and Losweiser exchanged glances, having gone over the first question many times before. Instantly, they both remembered how exactly they had prepared. Then, Losweiser suggested a better date. So, at the commission, they unanimously named a figure. However, Walter found some inaccuracies in the dates and age of Noah. In any case, he continued his questioning, which now concerned the shortcomings. As they continued to play, Leon and Losweiser gave different answers. Leon spoke first, starting to explain. He portrayed himself as a loser, but Losweiser as a rare hard worker. At the same time, he managed to swear that he himself would try to relieve his wife of some of her worries. The committee liked this answer, and a separate question was already asked to Losweiser herself. The queen, in turn, began to praise Len. In particular, she noted Leon's concern for his wife's health. Like Leon, she promised to become better. After which, miscalculating his strength, he squeezed the hunter's palm with all his might. The commission once again acknowledged that they were looking at a wonderful married couple. The questions and answers continued for some time. Gradually, this meeting came to an end. The couple had questions to ask each other, but Losweiser had none. Then, the right was given to Leon, who thought about it in a strange way. Suddenly, Leon asked about the teddy bear that Losweiser had given him. Losweiser didn't answer right away, as Leon was deviating from the script. In the end, she was forced to admit that she liked the gift. Leon received her words with genuine joy. At this point, the commission completed its assessment and promised to report the results. A couple of days later, dragon mail arrived at Losweiser Castle. The whole family was called together to receive the commission's assessment. As one might expect, Noah was allowed to enter the academy. Of course, the whole family was shocked that the idea was a success. Children in particular rejoiced at this event. Losweiser didn't even skimp on her gratitude to Leon. So, to show her gratitude even more, she was going to cook up a family horror. Events jumped forward, moving to the Dragon Academy. Being one of the important teachers, Walter congratulated all those who passed the selection. The hall was buzzing, everyone was expecting names to be announced at any moment. Walter also reported that the approved families would serve as an example for other dragon marriages. In connection with this, one such family was invited onto the stage. To the applause, Losweiser and Leon appeared, leading Noah. He still couldn't understand why their family had become considered an example for others. In any case, Leon had no choice but to play his role. Unexpectedly, Noah was given the first word. Taking a deep breath, Noah began to praise her mother and promised to be like her. She also didn't forget to thank her sister Muen. Leon expected his daughter to praise him too. Sighing, Noya finally touched her father's figure. She called Leon the most important part of her admissions preparation. At some point, having finished, she thanked everyone for their attention. The speech touched Walter, and he even offered Leon to kiss his daughter. Leon himself was somewhat ashamed to perform such actions in public. Moreover, Noya opened up to Leon literally no more than a month ago. To avoid embarrassment, Leon rose to one knee, whispering to his daughter to play along. Blushing slightly, Noya also whispered her consent. Leon was briefly stunned because he did not expect such a thing. Afterwards, he kissed his daughter firmly on the forehead. Suddenly, Muwen jumped up from her seat, also wanting to kiss her little sister. Luckily, they stopped it in time. Walter spoke up, saying he held up the Losweiser family's behavior as an example to everyone. And yet, Leon made a mistake by not kissing his wife. Leon frowned, thinking that the old dragon was making fun of him. However, for Noah's sake, Leon simply could not do otherwise. So he called Losweiser over to him. The queen took a step, and Leon pulled her towards him. Their lips are about to touch. However, for some reason, Leon kissed her on the cheek. With this action, he puzzled Losweiser. To say the least, the dragon felt slightly humiliated. However, the public demanded more tenderness from Leon. Leon glanced around slightly and whispered that the performance would have to continue. Losweiser's growl was heard because she thought that Leon was simply playing with her. A minute later, the first model family was released. Noah was escorted to her new place of residence, after which the family began to say goodbye to her. Muwen hugged her little sister and didn't want to part with her. Leon also gave his parting instructions. Some of what he said he called Losweiser's opinion. Leon also did not forget to explain how Noah should behave with others. Leon admitted that during his studies he did not behave very well. So he asked his daughter not to repeat the mistakes of her youth. Noya swore that she would remember everything that was said to her. An hour later, events returned to Losweiser Castle. In her chambers, she read about one particular curse, and the effect of this curse intrigued Losweiser. Suddenly, something appeared in the room. It was Shirley, one of the best maids. Shirley reported to the queen that she had been unable to find her targets. The people they sent to look for simply disappeared. This situation alarmed Losweiser, since Leon himself had sought contact with these people. After accepting the report, she directed Shirley to continue her work. Around this same time, Leon was waving his stick furiously. He actively demonstrated to his daughter how this action should be performed. She repeated it, but it didn't work out very well. The training continued, and then, suddenly, Losweiser appeared nearby. Muwen stopped, glad to see her mother, and Leon didn't really expect to meet her. The queen said nothing to him and hugged her daughter. Losweiser thought she would delight her daughter with the news of a special dinner. Hearing this, Muwen's eyes sparkled with happiness. As quickly as possible, Muwen was taken to the castle. Now, the queen turned her attention to Leon. But then a stick was pointed in her direction. Losweiser chuckled because she had never been threatened like that before. Leon frowned, not expecting the great queen to consider the branch a threat. Losweiser reminded that Leon was the greatest dragon hunter, and even a branch could be a weapon in his hands. Leon sighed wearily in response. Afterwards, he decided that the queen had simply praised him ineptly. In any case, Leon couldn't do anything bad to Losweiser. Gradually, their conversation turned to Noya, who was actively writing from the academy. The queen considered such letters to be unusual, given her daughter's character. Leon nodded, comparing the similarities in the characters of mother and daughter. Losweiser praised her daughter, knowing at the same time that she respected Leon greatly, immediately admitting that Noya wanted to surpass Leon. Leon smiled because he was glad to hear something like that. The conversation continued, and, unnoticed by Leon, the queen began to take off her shoes. She admitted that Leon played a very important role in raising her daughters. Losweiser believed that this was how blood ties manifested themselves. Leon was impressed by the story because words about family values had previously meant nothing to him. After all, he was an orphan and did not know any joy. One day, Leon was finally adopted and his adoptive father became his master. And yet, the foster family never became a real one for Leon. At times, he often dreamed that his foster family would become a real one. These thoughts were interrupted when Leon was promised that one day he himself would have a family. And only now did Leon understand what it was like to have a family. And he was ready to fiercely defend those. Leon didn't even notice how deeply he was immersed in his thoughts. It was only thanks to Losweiser that he was able to come to his senses. Suddenly, Losweiser deliberately moved her shoe towards him. She openly hinted that Leon should put her shoes on. However, Leon couldn't really understand what exactly the queen was getting at. Afterwards, he stood in front of Losweiser. Leon did not want to humiliate himself any further by reminding the queen to wash her feet. In response, he received a kick in the leg. Losweiser insisted, because both of them should have returned to the castle by now. Leon sighed and had no choice but to obey. Losweiser liked the way she was looked after. Suddenly, Leon compared the process of putting shoes on the queen to putting a horseshoe on a donkey. At that very moment, the blow followed. However, Leon easily dodged it, as he acted quickly. A couple more days have passed since that evening. Some unknown dragon flew into the castle. It was truly enormous, far larger than Losweiser's own form. The queen explained that such dragons were usually used for transportation. The next moment, a beam struck downwards from the dragon's side. It was magic that brought Noah down to earth. As soon as the transfer process was completed, she said hello. Immediately, the other sister rushed to hug her. Then Noah's gaze fell on Leon. After hugging each other, the family headed to the castle. Already there, Noya demonstrated her highest marks. Losweiser was pleased with her daughter's progress. And in only one single subject, Noya failed to be the best. Losweiser saw no reason to be upset, calling what had already been achieved a real feat. Leon considered it important to finally express his opinion as the key one, and therefore he also supported Noah's successes. While emphasizing other things, he called Noah an outstanding student among his peers. Noya interrupted him because she had heard that Leon was the best in everything in his time. Leon reported that he became such only after some time and not immediately. By this, he made it clear that great accomplishments were still awaiting Noah. After that, suddenly, the conversation turned to victory in a possible duel between Losweiser and Leon. Each of them immediately declared themselves the winner. Immediately after this, their indignant glances met. Looking back, Leon called himself the best martial artist. Losweiser also tried to present herself in a positive light. Then both parents started arguing. At some point, they decided to duel to find out which of them was right. The daughters were not averse to gawking at what would come out. Already outside, both parents were warming up. None of the daughters really understood yet who would win. Losweiser tried to force Leon to surrender, hinting that he had not yet recovered. But Leon didn't even want to think about such a thing, because it wasn't often that he could fight the queen herself. Then Losweiser suggested making a bet. If he won, Leon could live peacefully, but if he lost, he would be obliged to fulfill one wish. Leon frowned, going over the possible dangers of this decision in his head. Ultimately, he gave his consent, after which, being ready to begin the battle. Losweiser laughed in response and nodded her head. There was a pause, and the wind blew, raising clouds of dust. The daughters fidgeted on the bench, waiting for it to begin. By chance, a drink cup was hit. He fell, hitting the wall with a loud slap. This event served as a kind of signal for the beginning of the fight. Leon charged forward, intending to crush Losweiser with one blow. But the queen put up a block in time. Immediately after this, putting his tail into action. At a dangerous angle, it passed very close to Leon's face. Leon had no choice but to take the rebound. At the same moment, concentrating a magical charge in your hand. Having fired a charge into the ground, Leon pushed off and attacked with his feet. But this time too, Losweiser managed to cope. The queen understood that in a physical confrontation, she would sooner or later lose. Because of this, Losweiser decided to keep her distance. Leon even laughed at the fact that the queen was afraid to get close. Following this, Losweiser unleashed her magic. The daughters watched the fight, believing that Leon was close to defeat because he began to dodge. At the same time, Losweiser showed uncertainty in close combat. Muin liked the way Noya assessed the fight. Meanwhile, Losweiser continued to attempt to destroy Leon remotely. Relying on his endurance, Leon changed direction every now and then, avoiding the magic. They both knew that this couldn't go on for much longer. At some point, Losweiser used a special skill. A neon explosion erupted where Leon was. Huge and turbulent clouds of dust rose up. Leon jumped out of them, completely unharmed. Losweiser quickly realized that Leon was acting through his own magical enhancements. Leon moved more confidently than before, because he lived with the desire for the promised peace. Having closed the distance, he again switched to close combat. Lostweiser grinned, never expecting Leon to be so capable. Leon himself grinned because he believed that he had managed to find the dragon's weak spot. The next moment, he made a tackle. Lostweiser had a hard time in this case. After all, Leon's grin with a raised fist was getting closer and closer to her. The queen was so confused that she even lost her balance. She was already falling to the ground when suddenly her hand was grabbed, after which they pulled it confidently. Thus, Lostweiser found herself in Leon's arms. Both of them blushed, and the queen only hesitantly called her husband by name. But the next moment, Lostweiser used magic. A terrible heat touched Leon's chest and he recoiled. But this effect, strangely enough, lasted no more than a second. Very quickly the magic weakened and dissolved. Just then, the daughters ran up to their parents. Leon sighed and admitted that he had lost the duel due to carelessness. Lostweiser spoke up, acknowledging Leon's excellent fighting qualities. In any case, Leon himself admitted defeat. The hunter almost had a stroke because he completely forgot about the conditions, after which he fell to the ground, pretending to be dead. The performance ended, and hours later, night fell on the castle. In the children's room, Leon lectured his daughters. He asked Noah to take care of Muen, as he was still an inexperienced dragon. But the girls didn't understand why Leon behaved this way. As simply as possible, Leon explained that he was in for torture all night long. Then the girls thought that they were simply going to eat Leon, as an analogy, citing the behavior of some insects. Suddenly, Lostweiser's voice was heard, condemning Leon's fabrications about himself. Afterwards, she put her daughters to bed, promising that everything would be all right with their father. Having finished with this, she dragged Leon along with her. The daughters were left wondering what the adults would do at night. Subsequently, the action moved to the royal bedroom. Having seated Leon, Lostweiser offered him a drink. But he, not being in the mood, refused. Then, Lostweiser began to remind Leon of his duty with desire. And yet, for the sake of maintaining a clear mind, Leon refused to drink. Putting down her glass, Lostweiser said that she wished Leon victory. Leon was surprised by such a revelation. In fact, the queen was not averse to letting Leon rest. Leon chuckled and asked the queen to admit defeat in the fight. Lostweiser did not want to do something like this because she had come up with something better. The next thing she did was lift the glass and tilt it. Pouring out, the red wine spread across her chest. Next, she sat down on Leon's lap, finally asking Leon to drink the poured-out drink to the very last drop. Leon held on with all his might. The offer was so tempting. No matter how hard he tried, Leon gradually lost his composure. Another second, and he was pressed against Lostweiser's chest. Slowly, his tongue began to lick off the remains of the wine, with his efforts causing the queen to have intermittent breathing. But for Lostweiser, that was just the beginning. She demanded that Leon open his mouth. At that very moment, a trickle of blood appeared from the edge of her lips. She deliberately dripped it straight into Leon's mouth. The taste of blood instantly hit Leon's head. He recoiled, not understanding what exactly Lostweiser wanted to achieve. Leon guessed that they were conducting some experiments on him again. Lostweiser made no secret of the fact that she had decided to try out the blood curse. Another moment, and Leon's eyes changed color. Thus, Lostweiser took revenge for Leon's behavior at the time of his capture. Leon held his ground and tried to reason with Lostweiser. The queen knew the high price, but nevertheless announced that she had reversed the curse. After her words, Leon suddenly felt an unbearable heat spreading throughout his body. Suddenly, Leon was touched by the hand of the queen, who regretted her eternal role as dominant. Now, she wanted to look at Leon from the same side. Having finished speaking, she announced the beginning of the entertainment. Leon looked up at her, breathing heavily and looking exhausted. Lostweiser scoffed, noting that Leon was losing control. Lostweiser's next move was to summon something like a mirror. She explained that it was an artifact that could record an image. Leon looked in the mirror, and Lostweiser forced him to state his current desire. But the confession of a kiss seemed petty to her. She demanded that Leon pronounce his words loudly and clearly. Finally, with a cry, Leon showed his attraction to the queen. Lostweiser laughed because once again she managed to break Leon's spirit. Then she slapped him. The slap he received only inflamed Leon's passion. His body began to move, completely disobeying his mind. Another moment, and he knocked down Lostweiser. Lostweiser gave in, skillfully playing the role of the victim. Unable to contain himself, Leon began kissing her hands. Every now and then, he would interrupt for all sorts of sweet compliments. The queen was quite pleased with this whole situation, so she was ready to give herself completely to it. That evening, they became one again. Their pleasures continued until the next morning. The bedroom was a complete mess. Leon was the first to wake up, groaning as he did so. He felt that Losweiser had gained the upper hand again that night. As usual, he blamed magic for everything that happened. Once again, Leon was outwitted, and the one who was to blame for all this was now sleeping peacefully. Slowly, Leon placed his hand on Losweiser's cheek. Only later did I realize that I had done it unconsciously. Horrified by his own actions, he recoiled. Everything was confused in Leon's head, and he barely understood his actions. And yet, Losweiser slept unnecessarily soundly. So Leon tried to push her away. In a gentle voice, he reminded her that Losweiser had never behaved like this before. But the queen still did not open her eyes. In the end, Leon came to the conclusion that she was under the influence of her own magic. All this meant that Leon had a chance to escape, and a concrete plan had already matured in his head. First of all, Leon had to get his armor back. With their help, he could cover large distances without getting tired. In my head, this plan sounded really great. He was so good that Leon even burst out laughing. But gradually, his laughter began to fade. Subsequently, it was replaced by sadness and despondency. After all, Leon had never lived among people of the order of two people and did not know how he could be received. Moreover, Leon had many questions regarding his captivity. For this reason, Leon decided to wait with his escape. Moreover, even in the Dragon Castle, he had important business. Immediately after this, the events moved on to Leon's playing daughters. They had a good time outside the castle. It was his daughters who were a major reason why Leon refused to flee. Gradually, his gaze touched Losweiser. After all, Leon still had to take revenge on her, especially when she was at her most helpless. Later, Losweiser's daughters came into the bedroom. They found it strange that their mother was still fast asleep. In this regard, Leon was even asked about the events of the night. With an awkward laugh, Leon theorized that Losweiser had caught a cold. Afterwards, he tried to find support from the maid. She nodded her head, confirming that the queen was all right. Moreover, the maid temporarily took on the queen's legal responsibilities. The daughters reacted with bitterness to the news that Losweiser would not wake up soon. All this time, Leon kept a close eye on Losweiser, considering it necessary to take care of her. Neue guessed that while her mother was sleeping, Leon wanted to do something with her. Leon made it clear that he didn't mean to do anything bad. The situation was resolved, and, having said goodbye, the daughters left their mother's bedroom. At the same time, a few kind words were said to Leon. Alone again with Losweiser, Leon considered what to do. First of all, he considered it necessary to bring a basin of water. A couple of minutes later, he was soaking a towel in a basin. Out of concern for Losweiser's health, he began to wipe her down. For the first time, Leon felt the complete defenselessness of this dragon. Having finished wiping her down, he decided that it would be necessary to change the queen's clothes. For this reason, Leon climbed into Losweiser's closet, after which he began to sort through her outfits in order to find one to his taste. At some point in time, the right style was found. Next, Leon moved on to the queen's hair. After a few minutes, the result he got made him genuinely happy. Now, on the bed, lay a dragon in a latex rabbit suit. Leon himself didn't expect that the outfit he had chosen would suit Losweiser so well. But then, suddenly, the mark on his chest flashed. Leon was scared, because he didn't understand at all what was happening. A second later, he realized that one of the mark's holders wanted intimacy. Not wanting anything like that, Leon began to recite the litany of the dragon hunters. Gradually, thanks to the litany, Leon's lust weakened. He let out a sigh of relief, deciding to enjoy just the sight of Losweiser. A moment later, Leon remembered the queen's artifact. In fact, it was the most ordinary camera for filming. Using it, Leon began to film Losweiser from different angles. He even made it so that in one frame the dragon smiled. Leon swore that he would carefully preserve the resulting photographs. At some point, Losweiser let out a groan. Leon was scared, thinking that she was about to wake up. But fortunately, the queen showed no signs of awakening. Leon could breathe a sigh of relief as the danger turned out to be false. It was late, so Leon left all his other plans for revenge for the next day. The next morning, in the corridors of the castle, Muen called for her sister. Noya asked her to calm down and tell everything slowly. Muen reported that she could not find her father anywhere, as she wanted to ask him to fix the cube. Noya immediately considered that their father could have escaped during the night. So taking Muen by the hand, she went in search of Leon. Together, they began to actively call Leon. Their search continued for a long time, but no matter where they looked, they couldn't find Leon. Even in his own room, he was absent. Just in case, Muen even looked into the trash can. Noya sternly scolded her sister for wasting her time on nonsense. Eventually, Muen came to the conclusion that her father had simply disappeared. Noya reassured her sister, reminding her that all people passed away over time. As an example, Noya cited a certain past time. Muen thought, trying to remember. But in her memory, only Leon's figure remained frozen. In turn, Noya only became convinced of her suspicions regarding Leon, gradually starting to consider him a stranger, not a relative. This meant that there was no place for Leon in the dragon family. Her thoughts were interrupted by the roar of her sister, who was afraid of being left alone without her parents. Noya calmed her down, promising not to abandon her. In response, Muen rushed into her arms. And yet, Noya believed that it was necessary to say goodbye to her father. Gradually, the scene moved to a wooded area near the castle. Now, Leon enjoyed the beauty there. He acted on the maid's advice in order to find out the queen's favorite place. Although Leon was offered an escort, he decided to go alone. However, Leon did not act out of good intentions, but rather wanted to once again pick on Lostweiser. Leon smiled, anticipating his perfect plan for revenge. Thus, Leon wanted to take revenge on the queen for his own humiliation. Soon, he found a tree that was strong enough. He was already imagining how he would press the queen to him. But first, Leon needed to correct the terrain's flaws. He hoped that the general views would make Lostweiser lose his guard. He painstakingly wrote down everything he discovered and planned. Now, Leon only had to wait for Lostweiser to awaken. He chuckled, thinking that he would finally succeed. It was already getting closer to night when Leon returned to the castle. In the courtyard of the castle, he saw a fire pit and crowds of grieving servants. As it turned out, it was some kind of funeral. Directly in front of the fire, on a pedestal, two sisters made offerings. Noya asked her sister not to dwell on it and to let go of the loss. Not really understanding what was happening, Leon decided to play along. So pushing aside the servants, Leon went to the children. Approaching his daughters, he offered to play a musical instrument. Suddenly, he saw that the offerings were standing in front of his own photograph. Leon appreciated it, thinking it looked great. Only a couple of seconds later, inspiration dawned on him. And the daughters, frightened, saw their father behind them. Leon turned to those, believing that they had buried his father too quickly. The next moment, Muen burst into tears. She rushed towards Leon, hugging him tightly. Crying, she said that she thought that Leon no longer loved her. Leon stroked his daughter, asking her to forget such nonsense. Noya spoke up, explaining to Leon that the ceremony had begun because the daughters had been unable to find their father. In her mind, Noya admitted that she had been wrong about Leon. Since the situation was settled, Leon dismissed the servants. Muen also felt better and wanted to take her steak back. Leon nodded and she rushed off to get her favorite food. Noya, standing nearby, asked her father to warn his daughters next time. She noted that Muen was the one who was most worried about Leon. Embarrassed, Leon apologized for the inconvenience. And yet, regarding the events that unfolded, Noya also felt some of her own guilt. And therefore, she apologized to Leon. After this, Noya bowed to her father. Leon was glad of her frankness, now realizing that he himself had to grow up. He felt that Noya needed more care than anyone else. So, Leon should have taken control of this situation. Mentally, he gave his word that he would never betray her. The next day came, and Lostweiser was still asleep. At some point, her fingers twitched. The queen's eyes gradually opened. Nearby, Muen was glad to see that her mother had finally woken up. Muen admitted that she was very worried about her. Lostweiser apologized for causing such an experience. However, Lostweiser felt a wild weakness. The whole point was that over the past few years, the queen had used up most of her magical potential. Gradually, her thoughts turned to Leon, who had probably already escaped. With Muen's help, she found out that she had slept for about 2 days. Lostweiser frowned. She knew Leon couldn't have gotten far. And just now, Leon appeared in her bedroom, offering her fish for dinner. Muen was delighted, actively thanking her father. But then Leon noticed something unusual. Losweiser looked at him with bewilderment. Leon told her that he had spent his last days usefully. These words, particularly those concerning his concern for his wife, confused Losweiser. Meanwhile, Leon sent his daughter to take the fish to the kitchen. Muen was happy to help. At the same time, he made it clear that his parents would be arriving for dinner later. Left alone, Losweiser admitted that she was surprised by Leon's decision to stay. Leon considered this to be stupid because a lot of things still hadn't been decided. Losweiser asked Leon to be specific in his words. Leaning over, Leon tried to remind the queen of her old prank. A moment later, fear filled the queen's face. Leon's whole appearance confirmed her suspicions. Covering herself with a blanket, Losweiser began to dissuade Leon from rash actions. But Leon didn't think so, reminding him how merciless the queen herself was. Then, her requests turned into counter-threats. But Leon was no longer afraid of her at all. The next thing he did was take Losweiser into his arms. After all, from now on, she was a captive of the dragon hunter. Afterwards, Leon carried Losweiser outside the castle. She actively resisted, ordering herself to let go. At this moment, she regretted more than ever that she was weakened and could not fight back. Soon, Leon brought it under the pre-selected tree. He lowered Losweiser, and she demanded an answer. Leon began to explain that he had discovered the dragon's favorite places. Losweiser became angry when she realized that she would be dragged away somewhere further. Suddenly, Leon asked to look at the castle from the side. Losweiser already guessed the nature of Leon's revenge. As he unbuttoned his shirt, her symbol on his chest burst into flames. While the queen tried to contain her emotions, Leon expressed the usefulness of the feeling of revenge. Then he roughly grabbed her by the chin. He deliberately forced her to look at the castle, which was a symbol of power. Under these circumstances, Leon intended to manipulate the dragon. Leon expected to see Losweiser suffer. Afterwards, he roughly knocked her down. His lips began to touch the queen's tender body. But Losweiser was only feigning weakness. After waiting for a moment, she activated her tail. He instantly wrapped himself around Leon's hand. Losweiser's voice was heard, demanding that Leon work hard. She gave her word that afterward she would take even harsher revenge on the dragon hunter. Leon was not afraid because he never looked into the future. Afterwards, neither of them said a word. In the morning, they both returned to the castle. Both were barely breathing, looking extremely tired. Moreover, Leon had to give it his all, and in different places too. Seeing that Losweiser was fast asleep, he decided that she was satisfied after all. Suddenly it dawned on Leon that he had been trying to achieve something completely different. Then Leon almost screamed when he realized his mistake. Be that as it may, Leon carried out his revenge. After which, he hurried back to his chambers. But as soon as Leon moved, a hand reached out towards him. Losweiser grabbed the hem of his clothes, clearly not wanting to let him go. After which, the queen suddenly began to cough and tremble. Leon wanted to go back and warm Losweiser, but he began to fight this feeling. Gradually, the feeling of guardianship overcame the imposed hostility. So Leon quickly dived under the blanket. Moreover, it was already warm in Losweiser's bed. A couple more hours passed and daylight arrived. The door to the queen's bedroom opened and Muen entered. Having barely rubbed her eyes, she hurried to her mother. She began to push and tried to wake up her mother. But in a dream, she just sent her daughter to play with her father. Then, Muen ran around the bed, starting to push her father. But Leon only mumbled in response that he wanted to sleep some more. Such answers made Muen pout with resentment. It turned out that today, no one could play with Muen. On the other hand, Muen saw her parents together for the first time, and even hugging. At the same time, noticing many strange red spots on their bodies. Muen quickly concluded that they had been bitten by mosquitoes. To ease the symptoms of the bites, Muen rushed to get some medicine. After some digging, she found the ointment she needed. Then, prepare it for use. Next, as quickly as possible, Muen began to apply the ointment to her parents. Soon, Leon was awakened from a deep sleep. As Leon stood up, he felt that his face was incredibly wet. A second later, Losweiser and Leon looked at each other in bewilderment. Unaware of his appearance, he laughed at Losweiser. Muen appeared, explaining that she had specially smeared her parents. The parents have not yet explained to their daughter that the red spots were not caused by insect bites. However, Muen thought she did a great job. Leon did not scold his daughter, but on the contrary, praised her. Overjoyed, Muen already promised that next time she would behave in exactly the same way. About an hour passed since the parents woke up. Leon brought food specially to Losweiser's bedroom. Having filled the spoon, he brought it to the queen's mouth. Then he began to feed her, because the queen had not eaten for at least a couple of days. But Losweiser didn't need such treatment because she could take care of herself. Nevertheless, she liked the taste of the food. Leon was glad to hear this because he had prepared the dish himself. Subsequently, Losweiser began to beg for more food. Soon the bowl was empty. Leon explained that he was doing this to take care of the dragon, which had been exhausted in recent days. However, Losweiser did not appreciate this, calling Leon's idea torture. Leon didn't understand her reaction, trying to act like a caring husband. Afterwards, they said goodbye, almost rudely. Losweiser was indignant, still believing that she had been bullied. Her anger was so great that she hit the wall. The force of the impact was so great that it even caused cracks in the walls. Losweiser noticed this with genuine surprise. All this meant was that her power had finally returned. Around the same time, Leon was washing the dishes. He really hoped that Losweiser wouldn't have time to recover quickly. Night fell quite quickly. A servant appeared in the queen's chambers and brought medicine. But Losweiser didn't need anything like that, as she had already recovered. At some point, the maid saw a crack in the wall. Losweiser chuckled and joked about it. Unexpectedly, she asked the maid not to tell Leon that she was recovering. After all, the queen really wanted her to be taken care of further. The maid readily agreed to help, although she giggled. Losweiser herself was already anticipating how sophisticatedly she would be able to take revenge on Leon. A couple of days passed since then. Leon himself spent time outside with the children. Muen ran around actively, showing movements supposedly from the battle between her father and mother. Leon didn't understand why Muen liked that performance so much. The daughter admitted that she did not want to lag behind Noah. Now it dawned on Leon that Muen wanted to learn something. Then he thought hard about the whole situation, finally giving his word that he would personally train Muen. Some time has passed since the promise was made. Under Leon's guidance, Muen almost achieved a magical breakthrough. Leon was convinced that his daughter was nothing less than a genius. At some point, Muen announced that she was tired and wanted to eat. Leon laughed, realizing that he had been driving his daughter crazy. So, for now, he finished his lessons with Muen. At the same time, the maid brought something to the queen. The important conversation between the maid and the queen was interrupted by the arrival of Leon. Leon walked briskly into the bedroom, hoping to tease the exhausted Losweiser. He was already preparing his hands to knead the dragon's body. But then, for some reason, Losweiser urged Leon to give it his all. Although Leon didn't show it, the queen's words clearly hurt him. The next moment, Leon roughly tore off the blanket. Having opened it, he was going to punish the arrogant dragon. Leon hoped that Losweiser's body would be able to adequately respond to the sharpness of his tongue. The next moment, he was already throwing off his clothes. Suddenly, the queen's cheerful and bold voice was heard. The next action was that Losweiser's tail wrapped around Leon's body. The tail press was so strong that Leon even screamed. Afterwards, Losweiser threw him onto the bed. Then, with great gusto, she mounted Leon. Leon never expected that Losweiser was able to recover so quickly. In response, Losweiser hissed, making it clear that Leon's time to speak was over. Then with her tail, she tore the blanket off the nightstand. There was a whole range of devices for special entertainment hidden on it. A minute later, the shackles snapped on Leon's wrists. Shaking, he never expected that he would be able to fall into a trap again. Without seeing anything, Leon heard Losweiser's haughty voice urging him not to resist. Leon trembled, believing that the queen was going to beat a confession out of him. And then Leon revealed that while the queen was sleeping, he secretly braided her hair. Once, Losweiser even woke up in the middle of this process. Leon then said that he was happy to work with dragon hair. At that moment, Losweiser didn't let Leon know out loud how much she liked the hairstyle. But in her soul, as a memory, she was pleasantly surprised. Even now, Leon has made it clear that he has undergone training against interrogations. But then, from the side, Leon heard his voice, wanting to kiss the queen. Leon froze, continuing to listen to the requests there. Afterwards, Losweiser began asking Leon to identify the person to whom the voice belonged. Leon hesitated, for he was incredibly embarrassed. Ultimately, he refused to admit this. Then, Losweiser brought the sphere closer to Leon. The next moment, Leon's voice sounded from there again, swearing his love and all that jazz. Under the weight of this evidence, Leon decided to surrender. The queen liked that she managed to break Leon's will. But this was not enough for Losweiser, and she took a whip. Then, with the edge of the whip, she lifted Leon's face by the chin. Next came an unexpected dragon grab below the belt. Subsequently, the queen's bedroom was filled with sighs and active moans. After the execution, Leona was in a completely devastated state. With the last of his strength, he turned his head towards Losweiser. She was reading a letter that had obviously just arrived from the academy. The queen turned to Leon, indicating that they had been summoned. It turned out that Neue had managed to get into a fight with someone. The very next day, the family arrived at the director's office. Neue was also there, standing proudly in front of everyone. A little further away were those who had been beaten by Noah. After a short wait, the director was ready to start talking about the incident. But Losweiser suddenly intercepted his speech. She seethed, deciding that 3 brats had tried to beat up her daughter. And Leon began to circle around his daughter, trying to find out if she was injured. Eventually, the director announced that it was Neue who had attacked the trio. This news came as a surprise to Losweiser. At the same time, Neue looked at Leon strangely. Leon winked at her discreetly, praising her. However, the conflict was much broader than just a skirmish between children. Here, the interests of dragons born in clutches and live-born ones clashed. Thus, dragons born in a clutch inherited their strength from their mother. Those born alive took their powers from their father, and Noah, in this regard, was amazing in its own way. At some point, someone entered the office. It was a stately dragon, immediately announcing that he would cover all expenses. But he never expected that it would be his own son who would be beaten. The injured, crying children immediately rushed to their parents. Taking advantage of the moment, Losweiser explained that the dragons from the troubled clan had arrived. Naturally, a conflict immediately ensued as a result of what happened. Everything was about to turn into a fight when Leon stepped forward. Leon immediately made it clear that he was ready to stand up for his own. Their squabble was interrupted by the director's shout. He asked for order and the opportunity to be heard. He said that the conflict between the children occurred because of stupidity. But an hour later, the children decided to teach Noah a lesson. Having heard all this, the beaten ones did not know what to say in their defense. However, Neue herself decided to add to this story. The director was surprised, but allowed her to speak. Neue began to say that she was provoked, afterwards asking the beaten to confess to everything. Through tears and genuine fear, one of the young dragons confessed. Leon began to speak, saying that he had found some flaws in his daughter's behavior. Neue tensed up, thinking that she would be scolded. But then Leon began to explain that first he should have hit the knee. Leon detailed how one powerful dragon was defeated in a similar manner. The scream of the beaten dragon's father was heard, which began to portray Leon in a negative light. He insisted that Noah be expelled immediately. The director asked everyone to calm down, since a possible punishment could only be discussed by a committee. Moreover, the information against the man who was beaten was not the best. After this, the father of the beaten man completely lost control and began shouting in displeasure. Then, the conflict between him and Leon began to escalate again. During their argument, it turned out that the man who had been beaten was much older than Noah. Leon could hardly contain his laughter at this information. Then, the father of the beaten man began to belittle Leon himself, who was afraid to show his tail. Trying to insult the whole family, he pointed his finger in their direction. But it was immediately intercepted. With a palpable crunch, Leon pulled the impudent man's finger aside. Losweiser liked that Leon actively stood up for his own. The father of the beaten man became enraged and began threatening with consequences. Despite the threats and titles, Leon only yawned in response. At some point, Losweiser spoke up. Suddenly, she asked everyone to calm down, because she did not want a conflict between the clans. Afterwards, Losweiser agreed to any decision of the commission. In turn, the director asked the Duke to calm down, otherwise threatening to expel the children, and the beaten son begged him to stop. Having brought his anger under control, he also expressed his agreement to implement the commission's decision. He wanted to resolve the issue with Leon outside the academy. Then, the director decided to make a premature verdict. He sent Noah to class for moral instruction. Those who were beaten were also required to provide an explanation. The issue was resolved and Neue returned to her class. The parents said goodbye to her, and Leon reminded her where to hit. Suddenly, the director's voice was heard behind Leon. Leon turned around in fear, hoping that the director had not heard his instructions to his daughter. However, the director himself was interested in why Leon never showed his tail. Leon fell silent, worried, believing that his identity had been revealed. He hoped that Leon would tell him which dragon clan he was from. Losweiser intervened in the situation and began to explain that Leon was a commoner. The director laughed and nodded his head understandingly. In a peculiar way, he made it clear that he would not mind accepting more talented children. After clearing his throat, he expressed his faith in Noah's great future, hoping that by becoming a leader in the future, she will be able to defeat the people. The Duke watched their conversation furtively. At some point, he called on his henchmen to follow him. Afterwards, the action shifted to the exit at the academy. There, Leon and Losweiser's path was blocked by the Duke. The Queen immediately made it clear that she was not in the mood for conversation. The Duke made it clear that he had no intention of talking about children. The Duke insisted that the situation must be settled according to dragon customs. After which, he challenged Leon to a duel. The situation was dangerous because if he refused, the Losweiser clan could be disgraced. This was exactly what the Duke had hoped for. Losweiser approached Leon and began to ask him his opinion. Leon made it clear that he had no intention of backing down. The Queen allowed Leon to act, asking only that he not kill the Duke. The news of the upcoming duel instantly spread throughout the academy. Noya quickly realized who exactly could fight there. Like many children, she ran to the balcony where she could see the view. Leon, they called him a coward because he always hid his tail. The Duke himself was going to beat Leon up badly and thereby restore his son's honor. At the same time, he made it clear under what conditions Leon could win. Leon agreed with everything, only asking not to waste time. Then, calling on the Duke to finally begin the fight. The Duke himself became furious because Leon continued to mock him. The next moment, he summoned fire and pointed a flaming fist towards Leon. Leon easily dodged, admitting to himself that the Duke was no match for the battle dragons. After reminding that the Duke had 2 more blows, the Duke frowned, about to repeat the swing. But suddenly, the blow was no longer directed at Leon, but at the earth itself. Leon easily dodged the shockwave that was created with a jump. Then the Duke began to breathe out flames. A huge stream of fire was inexorably approaching Leon. He himself waited motionless for her. At the right moment, Leon suddenly dived downwards. From now on, the dragon hunter decided to lead the fight himself. The next moment, he hit the Duke on the thigh. He cried out in pain and fell to the ground. Taking advantage of the moment, Leon was already raising his own fist over him, after which he hit the Duke hard in the face. The attack was so powerful that the Duke was literally thrown to the side. Leon was not satisfied with the fight because he didn't even have to use magic. Those around him did not expect that the Duke would lose so quickly. Leon turned his attention to the others' henchmen, believing that they were also waiting their turn. But they decided not to tempt fate. In this case, Leon let them go, but warned them not to return. It seemed that at this point, things were settled. But then Leon suddenly discovered that Noya was standing nearby. She explained that she ended up nearby by chance. Then, handing some kind of box to the mother. Inside were cookies that Noya had made herself. However, she did not oblige me to try it. Losweiser broke the cookie in half and quickly gave one half to Leon. Leon willingly took it and began to try it. At the same time, Noya admitted that she was proud of her father. It was the first time Leon had heard such speeches from his daughter. All this could only mean that Leon had finally won her over. So, he gladly accepted the praise addressed to him, subsequently promising to teach Noah special combat techniques. Losweiser followed their conversation closely. Events took a leap forward, while Leon was reading in a calm environment. At some point, there was a knock on the door of his room. A second later, Losweiser walked inside. Leon did not expect her visit at all. Without uttering a word in response, the Queen sat down next to him, after which she demanded that Leon give her hand. Losweiser believed that Leon had injured his arm in the duel. Leon glanced at his hand, but didn't take the scratch there seriously. And yet, the Queen insisted on her own. Afterwards, she dipped a cotton swab into the healing ointment, after which she began to carefully apply it to Leon's hand. Len was impressed because for the first time, someone took care of his wounds, and especially doing it with such care and warmth. Leon actually quite liked the way Lostweiser handled things. The Queen's gentle touches literally clouded his mind. Suddenly, Lostweiser thanked Leon for the day. However, Leon himself did not really understand gratitude. Then, Lostweiser clarified that she thanked Leon for protecting the family. Coughing from discomfort, Leon called his prank a necessity. Lostweiser didn't answer, she just rubbed her pigtail in her hands. A little later, Lostweiser took Leon with her to the dragon family gathering. As always, Leon had no way out. Their daughters were also taken along with them. As soon as Lostweiser landed, Isha was already running towards her. She was glad to see her, and especially her dragon form. A moment later, Lostweiser released her form. But even in human form, Isha found her sister to be awesome. Lostweiser calmed her sister down, deciding to introduce her family. The first thing she pointed at was her husband, then bringing forward their children. Isha was delighted with the sight of the little dragons. She tried to hug each of the girls in turn, and even Noya, who usually didn't let anyone near her, allowed this. Isha was sincerely glad that her relatives had come to visit. After all, in their family, Lostweiser's offspring was the first new generation among dragons. She also praised Leon because she had heard about him as a caring father. Leon laughed in response, making the excuse that he simply loved messing around with children. Lostweiser intervened, believing that her daughters liked her better. A moment later, Leon and Lostweiser were already arguing. Isha tried to calm them down. There was no conflict, so Isha invited guests to her domain. After the dinner party, they all moved into the living room. Isha invited the little dragons to look at photographs of Lostweiser as a child. Muen was the first to respond, wanting to see something similar. Lostweiser herself was not delighted, being quite embarrassed by the photographs. She tried to take the album away, and then Isha looked away. Her gaze crossed with Leon's. The next moment, she threw the album at him. Leon immediately began rummaging through the photographs. Turning a couple of random pages of the photo album, his face distorted in surprise. He froze and then told Lostweiser that he didn't expect to see her like that. After which, he took out and showed a photograph of the Queen as a student. Leon didn't have time to ask anything else because Lostweiser deliberately stepped on his foot. In a low voice, she asked Leon not to forget his place. At the same time, Isha showed other photographs to the children. The daughters looked at the photographs of their mother with bated breath. At some point, Leon even joined the photo album. In one of the photographs, Lostweiser was even showing off with a cow, having just received the title. Leon was genuinely amazed by the Queen's image at that time. However, the photo album itself ended abruptly. And then, Lostweiser took that one away altogether. But then, Isha took out a strange ball, the sight of which made Lostweiser blush. Leon recognized the object, calling it the Memory Stone. After which, the children were asked to watch recordings from Lostweiser. Suddenly, Lostweiser began to plead, begging him not to do such a thing. On the other hand, Leon jumped up, asking for the opposite. For a time, under pressure from both sides, Isha found herself at a crossroads. After thinking about it, Isha decided to grant Leon's request, since he was a guest for the first time. Leon was happy because he managed to win this argument. Subsequently, Isha activated the stone. She called the next entry truly precious. When Lostweiser saw the first footage of the recording, she was stunned. After which, she completely forbade Leon to look at anything like that. Then, against the backdrop of the pond, young Lostweiser talked about her fantasies. Then, Lostweiser wanted to see a strong-willed person next to her, who would be better in everything. The daughters listened carefully to the recording, comparing the wishes there with Leon's personality. Even Leon himself eventually believed that they were talking about him. Isha remained silent, only carefully observing the reactions of others. Lostweiser swore that if she didn't meet someone like that, she would never marry. When the recording ended, Leon became strangely quiet. It turned out that he was perfect for the Queen. Lostweiser denied this, calling it the folly of youth. In turn, Isha wanted to know which of the two confessed their love first. The spouses immediately pointed at each other. Meanwhile, the conflict was about to flare up. So, for the good of everyone, Leon decided to take the confession upon himself. Isha chuckled, calling their family relationship perfect. After which, she suggested taking a look at Lostweiser's love letters. An hour later, everyone was given rooms to spend the night. They especially tried to please Leon and Lostweiser. Their entire bedroom was immersed in soft tones. The atmosphere there practically screamed about the need for love. Naturally, the husband and wife were shocked by this. And so, as soon as possible, Losweiser decided to ask her sister about the room's decor. Isha winked, explaining that she had prepared it specially. Moreover, asking his sister not to be shy, since it was a family matter. For the first time, Leon recognized Aisha as a talented schemer, and therefore decided to be more careful with her. Partly believing that Aisha had deliberately wanted to force Leon and Losweiser to reproduce. This gave Leon a strong desire to escape. Seeing Leon's movements, Isha asked where he was going. Leon made an excuse about his daughters, but Aisha made it clear that she had taken care of those. Amazingly, Aisha found a way to keep the girls busy for a long time. Afterwards, she left the room, wishing everyone a good night. With her departure, Leon and Losweiser were able to breathe a sigh of relief. Leon even said that Aisha turned out to be pure evil. Losweiser readily agreed with this conclusion. But she cut her thought off mid-sentence when she saw special depraved outfits in the closet, then letting Leon know that they would sleep separately. Leon wasn't exactly happy that he was getting a spot in the jacuzzi. Moreover, due to the fact that it was filled with hot water, it was impossible to sleep there. So Leon moved to the bed, finding it unusual. Just a couple of movements, and he realized that the bed had a water mattress. The next moment, Leon plopped down on the bed. She was so soft that Leon had no intention of letting Losweiser sleep alone. Losweiser sighed and agreed with strange ease. Leon's suspicions infuriated the queen. If the bullying continued, Losweiser threatened to use the toys from the closet on Leon. The issue was resolved, so Losweiser went to wash herself. Embarrassed that she would be watched, she threw Leon out of the room. Leon did not understand this attitude because he had already seen all the secret parts of the queen's body many times. Walking along the corridors of the castle, he suddenly stopped. After all, Isha was on the balcony, drinking wine. Leon quickly explained that he had gone out to get some air. Without thinking twice, Isha offered him a drink. Leon readily agreed to this proposal. Isha immediately began pouring wine, at the same time informing that it was Losweiser's favorite. Next, Isha began to remember how she spent time with her sister. Isha was vocal about caring for Losweiser for decades. Isha always knew that Losweiser felt terribly lonely. In her letters, she complained that Leon had been sleeping soundly for a long time. The whole story seemed extremely sad to Leon. But Leon was not destined to be sad, because with a laugh, Isha patted him on the back. Isha admitted that she always believed in Losweiser's chosen one. And after a personal meeting, her suspicions only became confirmed, after starting to express his assumptions that Losweiser really loved Leon. What he heard made Leon fall silent. After all, before, he never even thought that he could really like Losweiser. A couple of seconds later, Leon began to drive away such ridiculous thoughts. Isha immediately realized that Leon was embarrassed. Leon sighed heavily and came to the conclusion that he was forced to play the role of a lover. In the end, I completely agree with Aisha's opinion. Isha nodded approvingly, mentioning how easily the couple got along. Besides, Leon was the first person Losweiser showed emotion towards. However, Isha hoped that Leon wouldn't do anything stupid in the future. With complete seriousness, Leon gave the answer that he could be relied upon. Sincerely, he swore to protect his loved ones. The dragon really hoped that this is exactly how it would be. After which, she forced Leon to return to Losweiser. But when Leon was about to leave, she remembered something. Leon turned around with interest. Laughing, she asked Leon not to hold back at night. Leon froze again, because the dragon was talking about good soundproofing of the room. When the meaning dawned on Leon, his face turned red. A little later, Leon carefully opened the bedroom door. He peered inside, seeing Losweiser already asleep. Trying to make sure of this, he crawled onto the bed. Having decided that everything was exactly like this, he was delighted. However, Leon was in no hurry to go to bed himself and enjoyed the view of Losweiser. But the serene observation did not last long. After all, the mark on Losweiser's chest suddenly began to glow. Leon was in a panic because the dragon could wake up with a desire for immediate pleasure. However, strangely enough, Leon's own mark did not glow at all. To find out everything, Leon lowered the blanket. His movements awakened Losweiser. Leon squealed in fear because the light of the dragon mark was a fiction this time. Losweiser herself burst out laughing because she had managed to make a good joke. However, noting that the joke clearly didn't go over well with Leon. Pulling himself together, Leon began to deny everything. Then, as quickly as possible, Leon lay down under the blanket, not wanting to hear anything anymore. Losweiser warned him that she would not tolerate attacks in the middle of the night. Afterwards, she decided to get out of bed. But as soon as I lowered my first leg, a spider descended from the ceiling. Losweiser froze in horror at the sight of the spider, and then her desperate cry was heard. The next moment, she rushed towards Leon. Barely holding back tears, she complained about the spider. Leon remembered a photograph where a young Losweiser was afraid of a spider, after which he burst out laughing, because it turned out that the queen did have fears after all. Deciding to help, Leon attempted to catch the spider. With one deft movement, he grabbed him. However, the spider seemed too strange to Leon. Realizing it was a toy, he showed the spider to the terrified Losweiser. The queen demanded that the spider be destroyed regardless of its position. Frightened by her pressure, Leon agreed. And then, with all his might, he threw the spider out the window. The problem was solved, and Leon was ready to return to sleep. He even thought that the spider could have been Ish's work. This way, Leon could be shown the true side of Losweiser's personality. Losweiser herself had calmed down and was also ready to return to sleep. Leon agreed, even though he wouldn't mind changing places. A couple of minutes later, they were already lying under the blanket. None of them could sleep, and Leon even offered to hold his hand if the queen was afraid. Losweiser looked at him thoughtfully. Following this, she yawned sleepily. Then, carefully, she grabbed Leon's little finger. Leon was immediately indignant that she was only holding on to one finger, after which he deliberately placed her palm in his. He held it tightly and demonstrated exactly how it was all done. Losweiser's mouth dropped open in surprise, not expecting such boldness from Leon. She suddenly realized how awkward the situation was. With an effort of will, she tried to drive away the unworthy emotions. In the following minutes, without opening their eyes, they chatted about all sorts of things. Despite the whole range of different emotions, the queen actually enjoyed holding Leon's hand, and the very interlacing of fingers evoked strange emotions in her. It was as if a current from those passed through the queen's entire body. An hour later, having finished all the long conversations, both closed their eyes and fell silent. Leon didn't sleep, he was watching for Losweiser to fall asleep. He carefully opened his eye and glanced at her. Leon hoped that now he would be able to take his hand back. Losweiser felt Leon fidget, thinking he was trying to grope her. A minute later, she was completely outraged by such impudence. In the end, she decided to touch Leon in return. She rustled loudly under the blanket, causing Leon to flinch. Trying not to show it, he felt the queen's hand sinking lower and lower. Due to the queen's particularly delicate skin, Leon mostly felt ticklish. Be that as it may, soon a strange feeling of hunger began to grow in Leon. At some point, their mutual feelings of wanting more touched. Silently, their heated faces stared at each other. Another moment, and the blanket was thrown off. Leon pressed Losweiser to the bed and climbed onto it himself. Only on this night was he willing to exchange fluids voluntarily. There was a tiny pause. Losweiser called Leon tenderly. Leon swallowed hard and was unable to utter a word. And yet, Leon found it strange that, despite the mutual desire, no one present had their mark lit up. The magic didn't work, but their lips still grew closer and closer. At some point, their bed creaked. The mechanism worked, and another toy spider descended from the ceiling. In the end, all the romance turned into a frightened scream from Losweiser. Isha heard all this clearly, realizing that her surprise was a success. After another joke, Losweiser was again in Leon's arms. He hugged the queen, promising to protect her from all adversity. At one point, Losweiser felt Leon's heart beating madly fast. Just in case, Leon said that he was also afraid of spiders. In response, the queen promised that she would no longer force her husband to do anything like that. Nevertheless, the queen asked that Leon not tell anyone about what had happened. Already calm and uneventful, the night passed and morning came. Losweiser woke up to the sound of birds singing. Jumping up abruptly, she couldn't even understand when exactly she had managed to fall asleep. Looking around, she didn't find Leon anywhere. Apparently, he got up much earlier. Losweiser was glad of his absence, as she was still embarrassed by the events of the night. Moreover, for the first time, the queen broke her own rules. She allowed her own weakness to show through. Having dressed quickly, she left the bedroom. But right at the exit from that one, the queen was already waiting. It was Isha, wanting to hear about the night's adventures. Realizing that everything was a setup by her sister, Losweiser yelled at her. Moreover, Losweiser made it clear that the toys remained untouched. Isha sighed, promising to prepare better next time. After which, calling his sister to breakfast. Already at this time, Leon was sitting with the children in the refectory. He played with Muen as if she were his beloved daughter. At some point, other relatives appeared in the refectory. Muen immediately rushed to her mother. A little later, the whole family sat down at the table. Losweiser and Leon felt strangely embarrassed. Leon kept running thoughts through his head. They concerned the knight, which Leon, in general, liked. However, Leon's character traits tried to convince him of the wrongness of such closeness with the enemy. However, he was unable to come to any single conclusion. And in general, Leon was already completely distracted by food. He reached for the peanut butter when his hand came into contact with Losweiser's. After which, they both looked at each other. Suddenly, the story took a small digression concerning a special bed. It was custom-made and had many hidden secrets. Everything was done in such a way that only by lying together in the middle of the bed could the traps be activated. After finishing their retreat, Leon and Losweiser looked away in embarrassment. Isha noticed that the couple was clearly experiencing intense emotions. Leon and Losweiser decided to laugh it off. Isha giggled, suggesting that the couple take a shower to let off some steam. Isha generally enjoyed spending time with her relatives, and especially actively joking with them. However, she suddenly mentioned the conflict with the Duke, which was known to many. Then Leon and Losweiser explained in detail what exactly the situation was. Isha laughed even harder, praising Noah at the same time. However, she knew that the Duke had not calmed down and even managed to create a scandal. A dragon named Constantine and Leon often appeared in conversations. I heard something about him. At some point, Aisha recalled that Constantine was actively expanding his holdings. Losweiser even came to the conclusion that Constantine could have attacked. The queen was not afraid of this and was ready for the challenge. A little later, the action moved to the gates of Aisha Castle. Relatives actively said goodbye. But before parting, Isha gave her sister a gift. She also did not forget to give instructions to her nieces. Having received a promise from her nieces, she kissed them all warmly. Subsequently, her attention also fell on Leon. Briefly, they mentioned the promise that Leon still swore to keep. Losweiser looked at them with bewilderment, not understanding the essence of the conversation. After which, she assumed her true dragon form. Isha watched her relatives fly away. Subsequently, she returned inside the castle. She found communication with loved ones, especially children, very exciting. For now, she could only hope that there would be more nephews later. Little by little, she entered her room. But she didn't expect to fall into her own spider trap. However, she did not feel frightened. She, on the contrary, understood that in this way, Leon was protecting his wife. Suddenly, Leon was attacked by a sneeze, and he realized that the man's surprise had clearly been discovered. Suddenly, it occurred to him that the dragons he had encountered were not like those he had fought. Leon acknowledged that dragons could be compassionate, friendly, and also family-oriented. Leon discussed the situation with himself in a low voice. Suddenly, Losweiser decided to chat with Leon. The queen wanted to know what Leon was chatting about with her sister. However, Leon flatly refused to reveal the secret. A couple of hours into the flight, already in their castle, the parents put their daughters to bed. Quietly closing the door, Losweiser left their room. Suddenly, Leon called out to her. Planning to carry out his plan of revenge, he invited Losweiser to have some fun. Leon hinted that he wouldn't mind washing the queen. His innuendos and excessive vulgarity infuriated Losweiser. But first, the story took a digression regarding Losweiser's past. Then, Isha wanted to show something to her nieces. In the distant past, she often spied on Losweiser. At that moment, she was opening the bathroom door. There, actively singing, the still young Losweiser was soaping herself. Leon burst into laughter at such revelations. Losweiser tried to destroy the recording, but Aisha stopped her. Memories from the distant past were still carefully preserved in special stones. Already in the present, Leon actively operated with this fact. However, the queen did not share his joy at all. With a sharp action, she hit Leon in the shoulder. She pressed him down and glared at him. After which, she stated unequivocally that she was ready to continue the night's fun. Leon trembled as he watched the queen flex her fists. In the end, Leon decided to escape her rage by running away. He ran into the room as quickly as possible. but he didn't have time to close the door because Losvisor had already stuck her hand inside. She forced the door open, giving Leon only 10 minutes to prepare. At the same time, reminding that on this night, Leon will suffer a terrible punishment. After which, Losvisor slammed the door loudly. Leon was confused because he had created problems for himself literally out of nowhere. On the other hand, Leon now knew what and how could influence Losvisor. This means that Leon could use something like this for his manipulations. Despite the high price for such a thing, Leon was not averse to continuing his experiments. But of course, he would have to pay with his body. Leon consoled himself with the thought that he would be able to cause discomfort to the queen as well. After all, it was his duty as a hunter. So, taking heart, he headed to Losvisor's bedroom. About 10 minutes passed afterwards. After the first few games, Leon already looked exhausted. Masha with a whip, Losvisor insisted that Leon call her teacher. Suddenly, Leon decided to tease the queen. She became furious and swung the whip, after which Leon received a slap on the shoulder. Losvisor reminded that Leon had to play his part. Leon remained silent, feeling out of place. A few seconds later, he came to the conclusion that Losvisor simply wanted to humiliate him. Leon came to the conclusion that he should play the role of the mischievous student. So, in order to free himself faster, Leon decided to play along. Looking away, he began to ask the teacher for forgiveness. Losvisor liked his words and was ready to accept the homework. Leon froze because he knew nothing of the sort. In response, Losvisor was indignant because Leon had forgotten everything again. Continuing to play his role, Leon asked the teacher to remind him of everything again. After which, Losvisor sat on top of Leon. After which, he asked Leon to make the dragon sign glow. At the same time, reminding him that if he failed, Leon would face punishment. Leon swallowed and reached out to the queen. Leon reached out to Losvisor, remembering all her sensitive areas at the same time. Just a couple of movements and a feeling of pleasure swept over Losvisor. She admitted breathlessly that Leon had done a great job. Gradually, her words gave way to drawn-out groans. The story briefly rewinds to when Losvisor was just getting ready for the game. It just so happened that in the present, she was wearing the underwear her sister had given her. A minute later, Leon himself hoped that he had finished his homework. Losvisor smiled and was in no hurry to let him go. After all, Leona's main homework check was still ahead. Even more strongly, the queen pressed her entire weight onto Leon. The hunter even resigned himself to the fact that it was no longer possible for him to finish everything quickly. After all, from now on, the entire process was controlled by magic. Another second and Leon's mouth went dry. With each passing minute, his body became hotter and hotter. At some point, the hunter lost all control of himself. At this moment, Losvisor was actively enjoying his tenderness. Leon hoped that now the teacher had gotten what she needed. But in response, I received only sighs and gasps. Instinctively, Leon increased his pressure. A minute later, Leon exhaled tiredly. Afterwards, he admitted that it had finally all come to an end. As he got dressed, Leon hoped that the teacher no longer needed him. But right now, his hand was grabbed. By striking an inviting pose, Losvisor made it clear that Leon still had a lot of work to do. Leon stared at her, disappointed. With a sigh of pain, he had to return to bed. Already the next morning, Losvisor was beaming with satisfaction. Unlike her, Leon looked drained. On the way, they met daughters who did not expect to see their father in such a depressed state. Leon explained that he was simply overworked. Losvisor sighed, not bothering to explain it to the children. But the situation only puzzled the daughters even more. Suddenly, Muen decided to tell about her discovery. Based on her observations, she noted periods when one of the parents was always exhausted. Leon laughed and praised his daughter for her logic. Leon's pride in his daughter was truly great. Noya looked thoughtfully at those on the side. Besides, right now a transport dragon has appeared in the sky. Noah had to leave, and she said goodbye to her parents. The relatives said goodbye to her affectionately in response. As always, Leon said goodbye to Noah separately. The daughter didn't answer, only chuckling in his direction. After which, she was picked up by a magical beam. Muen waved her hand actively after the flying away dragon carrier. Since one daughter had left for the academy again, Leon was ready to take care of the remaining one. Muen thought about it, because her parents had been acting strangely lately. After thinking about it, she came to the conclusion to increase her father's strength. Following this, she pulled her father to the training ground. Losweiser became interested in her daughter's behavior and decided to take a look at it all. A little later, Leon and his daughter were actively engaged in stretching. He explained to Moen that it was always important to warm up before training. Soon, Losweiser showed up, wanting to participate. Moen was glad to see her mother joining her. Moreover, Losweiser promised that she would not give in. However, Leon was not impressed because he knew that the queen led a sedentary lifestyle. Losweiser thought differently, citing her victory in the duel as an argument. Moen was happy because her parents were arguing again. Leon quickly covered Moen's mouth so that she wouldn't say anything unnecessary. Moen didn't understand this, thinking that Leon would easily defeat the queen. Then Leon had to justify himself by saying that the victory in the duel was a gift. Suddenly, Losweiser could be heard scraping her tail on the ground. She offered Leon a new challenge, but this time in running. Leon eagerly accepted the challenge. A second later, Moen also volunteered to join them on the run. Soon, the maid began the countdown. When the signal was given, everyone rushed forward. Leon really hoped that the tail would hinder the dragons from running. Losweiser smiled, indicating that her tail helped her maintain balance. As a joke, she even suggested that Leon get his own. The race itself lasted 2 laps. Moen was the first to give in, as she no longer had the strength. A maid quickly came to her with water. However, Moen's father and mother continued to run. Tired, Leon already admitted that the competition had not been easy. However, Leon had no right to surrender or retreat. Leon could not allow this to happen, not so much because of pride, but because of his title as a dragon slayer. At some point, Leon and Losweiser collided. However, their run continued up to a certain point. Leon lay sprawled on the ground, breathing heavily. But Losweiser, on the contrary, showed no signs of fatigue. Leon asked to give him time to train, convincing him that he would eventually defeat the Dragon Queen. However, Losweiser believed that such a thing was unfeasible. In any case, she was waiting for Leon to admit defeat. Losweiser hoped Leon wasn't going to lie around all day. Finally, Leon jumped up and asked Losweiser not to be so arrogant. The queen did not comment on this in any way, taking responsibility for her daughter on this day. Moen quit at the end so that her father would train more. Leon froze. For the first time, he was called a weakling. He had no choice but to admit his total defeat. A few hours later, it was time for lunch. Scooping food into her spoon, Moen tried to feed Leon. Tiredly, Leon opened his mouth. At some point, Leon, being exhausted, simply collapsed onto the table. Leon blamed his current disgrace on the nocturnal pleasures he had arranged for Losweiser. The queen sighed, promising Leon not to burden him too much that night. Hearing this, Leon jerked in shock. Having grabbed Moen, he told her that he would be absent in the evening because of his daughter. In a low voice, he asked his daughter to play along. Losweiser agreed with this, however, asking Leon not to linger. Moreover, Moen promised that she would not detain her father. Losweiser left the refectory and walked along the cold corridors of the castle. Suddenly she stopped. Her personal spy emerged from the shadows. Losweiser asked not to waste time and tell everything. She said that she had come across traces of wanted persons who had left the human empire more than a year ago. They didn't just leave, they literally gave away all their property. But this situation, strangely enough, did not affect one donkey. Losweiser immediately realized that the donkey was the one Leon had often mentioned. After receiving the report, she sent a spy to gather further information. The spy disappeared into the darkness, and Losweiser stared at the night sky. She kept trying to make sense of Leon's mentor's strange behavior. Some time has passed since that day. One day, Leon and Losweiser brought news about sports games. Neue announced that there would be a sports festival at the academy. Neue called this an innovation that did not exist when the queen studied at the academy. It turned out that Losweiser even participated in something similar. The queen made it clear that she took only first place. However, Leon did not win that competition. After all, he was removed because he was so good. However, Moen thought that Leon was simply cheating, for which she immediately received a slap on the forehead. Besides, Leon didn't look for words purely in words. Gradually, the discussion returned to Noah's competition. But Neue didn't yet know whether she would participate in it herself. On the other hand, wanting to take first place, Leon was amazed by his daughter's winning spirit, which she inherited from her parents. Then, Leon and Losweiser exchanged glances. In the end, I decided to take part in the competition for my daughter's sake. Even Muen wanted to join this event. However, it turned out that the team could only consist of 3 people, so Muen was assigned the role of a fan. From now on, the family decided that they had to win at any cost. Later, the action took place at a training ground. Seeing Losweiser in light clothes, Leon appreciated her figure for the first time. Losweiser herself suggested running a couple of laps as a warm-up. Leon agreed, and they both began to warm up. As they ran, they chatted about the nature of dragon competitions. Leon found it fascinating that they were almost indistinguishable from human ones. Afterwards, their conversation turned to Leon's endurance. The hunter was infuriated by how often the queen reproached him for his recent defeat. Leon even decided to justify himself by saying that Losweiser was the only one to blame for this. Suddenly, the dragon stopped, deciding to give Leon some motivation. For winning the competition, she was willing to give Leon a week's rest. Leon's eyes immediately lit up with hope. Besides, Leon also wanted Noah to win. And so, morally filled, he ran even faster than before. Losweiser liked that once again, Leon fell for her trick. After about an hour, the warm-up was over. The previously unfortunate Leon roared with a new surge of strength because now the training itself was ahead. Nodding approvingly, Losweiser reached for the rope in her bag. She understood that the competition would clearly not be easy. Seeing the rope in her hands and thinking about everything, Leon protested. However, this time, there was nothing obscene on the queen's mind. She began to explain to Leon about the special sack race. Leon calmed down, and then Losweiser gave him a rope. A minute later, they tied themselves to each other. Once again, these two found intimacy awkward. In this regard, Leon suggested ending everything as quickly as possible. Afterwards, Leon tried to make a move, but nothing happened. He glanced questioningly at Losweiser, who for some reason had not moved.